Before we dive into tonight's story, I hope you're settling in comfortably wherever you are in the world. How has your day been treating you? Whether it's late evening where you're listening, or perhaps you're somewhere where dawn is breaking, take a moment to let the weight of the day fall away. What time is it for you right now? Are you tucked away in a cozy bedroom, maybe listening while commuting, or finding a quiet moment during your lunch break? No matter where you are, whether you're in bustling New York, quiet countryside England, the mountains of Colorado, or a small town anywhere across the globe, you found your way here to explore the mysteries that keep us awake at night. If you enjoy diving deep into the strange, the unexplained, and the conspiracy theories that make us question everything we think we know, make sure to subscribe to Sleep Theories. We explore the stories that mainstream media won't touch, the questions that make people uncomfortable, and the possibilities that exist just beyond the edge of accepted reality. Tonight's story is about edges, literally. It's about a young man who discovered something that perhaps he was never meant to see, something that would change not just his understanding of the world, but his place in it forever. So settle in, close your eyes if you can, and let me tell you about Noah Carter and his journey to the edge of everything. Journal entry, March 15th, 2024. Noah Carter, private log. My name is Noah Carter, and if you're reading this, then something has happened to me. I'm 28 years old, I have a master's degree in geospatial analysis from Colorado State, and until 3 months ago, I thought conspiracy theorists were delusional. I thought the Earth was a spinning ball hurling through space, that NASA told us the truth, and that satellite imagery showed us exactly what was really there. I was wrong about everything. I worked for Meridian Aerospace Solutions, a private contractor that processes raw satellite data for various government agencies. Mostly NASA, but also NOAA, the Department of Defense, and a handful of international space agencies. My job was simple. Take the raw satellite feeds, clean them up, remove artifacts and glitches, and prepare them for public release or academic use. It was boring work mostly. Hours spent staring at pixelated images of clouds, ocean and land masses, looking for processing errors, sensor malfunctions or data corruption. I'd been doing it for 3 years without incident. I was good at it. I had clearance. I had a reputation for being thorough and reliable. That's probably why they gave me the Antarctica assignment. On March 15th, I was working the night shift, processing a batch of images from the Terra satellite's MODIS sensor. The images covered the Southern Ocean and the Antarctic coastline. Routine stuff. Ice, water, more ice. I was half listening to a podcast, clicking through image after image when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a rendering error. A thin black line running along the bottom edge of the image, like a crack in the data. But as I zoomed in, adjusted the contrast, and applied different filters, the line remained consistent. It wasn't a glitch, it was actually there. The line stretched from one edge of the frame to the other, perfectly straight, perfectly black. It looked like the ocean just stopped, like there was an edge, and beyond that edge was nothing but void. I checked the metadata. The image was taken at 14:23 UTC on March 12th, showing coordinates roughly 200 nautical miles south of the Ross Ice Shelf. According to every map I'd ever seen, this should have been open ocean. The Southern Ocean extending toward the mythical point of the South Pole. But there was no ocean. There was this line, this edge. I flagged the image in our system, marking it as containing a significant anomaly requiring supervisor review. I wrote a brief report describing what I'd found and submitted it through proper channels. Then I went home, assuming someone would call me in the morning to discuss the obvious sensor malfunction. No one called. When I came in the next evening, I checked the system. My report was gone. The flagged image was gone. In its place was a standard Antarctic ice sheet image, showing nothing but white ice and blue ocean exactly where it should be. I thought maybe I'd made a mistake, maybe tagged the wrong image, but I remembered those coordinates. 78 degrees 42 minutes south, 165 degrees 30 minutes west. I pulled up the current satellite data for that exact location and timestamp. The black line was gone. Everything looked normal. But I knew what I'd seen. Audio recording, March 18th, 2024. Recorded on personal device. Noah Carter. Static, then Noah's voice, slightly distorted. Testing. Okay, it's recording. This is Noah, March 18th, about 2 a.m. I can't sleep, so I figured I don't know, document this weirdness. I've been thinking about that image for 3 days now, the one that disappeared. I tried asking my supervisor, Janet, about it today. Casual-like, you know. Asked if there had been any issues with the Terra satellite data from last week. She just looked at me funny and said everything had been processing normally. But here's the thing. I remember exactly what I saw. I've been working with satellite imagery for years. I know the difference between a sensor glitch and actual geographic features. This wasn't a malfunction. It was real. I've been doing some research. Turns out there are people who claim that Antarctica isn't what we think it is. Not just ice covering a continent, but something else. Some kind of barrier. I always thought these people were nuts, but... Long pause. I'm going to try to find that image again. I have to access the raw archives, the stuff that doesn't get processed through normal channels. If I can find it... Recording ends abruptly. Journal entry, March 22nd, 2024. I found it. I found the image, and so much more. Getting into the raw archives required some creativity. Officially, I didn't have access to unprocessed data older than 30 days. But there are always backdoors in any system, especially when you understand how government contractors cut corners on cybersecurity. Late Thursday night, I used a maintenance login that belonged to a technician who'd quit 6 months ago, but whose credentials were never properly deactivated. Classic bureaucratic oversight. From there, I could access the raw Terra satellite feeds going back 2 years. The image was still there, buried in a folder marked Archive Temp Delete. The same coordinates, the same timestamp, the same impossible black line stretching across the bottom of the frame. But now I could see it in context with the surrounding images, and what I found made my hands shake. The black line appeared in 17 consecutive images taken over a 6-hour period. As the satellite passed overhead, the line remained constant, always in the same relative position, always the same thickness, always perfectly straight. This wasn't a sensor glitch. Sensor glitches don't maintain geometric consistency across multiple orbital passes. But that was just the beginning. In the same archive folder I found dozens of other flagged images dating back months. All from the Antarctic region, all showing anomalies that had been scrubbed from the processed data, ice formations that didn't match known topography, perfectly circular clearings in the ice sheet that were too regular to be natural, and in several images, unmistakable signs of human activity, structures, vehicles, runway-like cleared areas, in regions that were supposedly uninhabited wilderness. The most disturbing discovery was a subfolder labelled Proggy Restricted. Inside were internal memos, most of them heavily redacted, but enough text remained to piece together fragments of something bigger. One memo, dated January 15th, 2024, read, Camera Suppression Protocol 67. B remains in effect for all orbital passes south of 75 degrees south. Automated cropping parameters have been updated to remove any visible indication of the Antarctic barrier from civilian release imagery. Previous incidents of unauthorized personnel accessing raw feeds have been contained through standard information security procedures. Another from November 2023. Project Horizon Edge continues to require absolute information compartmentalization. Satellite operators at all levels are to be briefed only on their specific assignments, and are not to have access to full orbital imagery of the target zone. The cover story regarding technical difficulties and seasonal atmospheric interference will be maintained. And the most chilling one, dated just 2 weeks before I started working on the Antarctic assignment. Noah Carter, Meridian Aerospace, Contract ID MA4471, has been selected for limited exposure to Sector 7 imagery. His psychological profile indicates low likelihood of conspiracy ideation and high compliance with authority. However, standard monitoring protocols should be implemented. They knew exactly what they were showing me, and they were watching to see how I'd react. Encrypted email log, March 24th, 2024 sender, Atlas revived at redacted recipient n.carter.meridian@redacted. Noah, you've been asking the right questions. This is dangerous for both of us, but you deserve to know the truth. The image you found, the black line, that's just the beginning. What you're seeing is the edge of the Antarctic barrier. It's not a natural ice formation. It's a wall, hundreds of feet high, extending in a perfect circle around what we call the known world. I'm sending you something that will change everything you think you know about our planet. This map was drawn in 1892 by Samuel Robotham, but it wasn't based on speculation. It was based on actual exploration data that was suppressed shortly after his death. Look at it carefully. You'll see that Antarctica isn't a continent at the bottom of a globe. It's a ring, a circular barrier of ice surrounding all the known continents and oceans. Beyond that barrier, we don't know what's there, but we know it's been kept secret for over a century. They chose you for the satellite work because your psychological profile suggested you'd dismiss any anomalies as technical glitches. But you didn't. You kept looking. That makes you either very brave or very stupid. Don't try to reply to this email. Don't try to trace it. If you want to know more, be at the Starbucks on 16th and Broadway tomorrow at 3 p.m. Come alone. Bring the Robotham map. Atlas. Attachment. Robotham 1892. azimuthalprojection.pdf. Journal entry. March 25th, 2024. I didn't go to the meeting. I'm not that stupid or that brave, but I did examine the map Atlas sent me. The Robotham map shows the Earth as a flat plane with the North Pole at the centre, and Antarctica as a circular ice wall around the perimeter. All the continents, North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, are arranged within this circle, surrounded by oceans that eventually meet the Antarctic ice barrier. According to the attached historical notes, Samuel Robotham was a 19th century English writer who founded something called the Flat Earth Society. Mainstream history dismisses him as a pseudo-scientist and religious fanatic, but the map includes precise coordinate notations and detailed measurements that suggest actual surveying work, not just theoretical speculation. More disturbing were the handwritten annotations in the margins, apparently added by someone decades after Robotham's death. Operation High Jump 1946-47, wall confirmed at coordinates 78 degrees south, 165 degrees west, height estimated 300 to 400 feet. Composition unknown. Admiral Byrd's report classified. 1958 Antarctic Treaty. International agreement to limit civilian access. Military operations only beyond 60 degrees south parallel. 1972 Satellite surveillance initiated. All imagery south of 75 degrees south to be processed through classified channels. I spent the rest of the night researching Operation High Jump. It was a real US Navy operation, led by Admiral Richard Byrd, involving over 4,000 personnel and multiple ships and aircraft. The official purpose was establishing a research base and testing equipment in polar conditions. But the operation was terminated early, after only 8 weeks instead of the planned 6 months. Admiral Byrd gave several interviews after returning, and his statements were odd. He talked about discovering vast regions beyond the pole, areas that contained minerals, coal and oil reserves. He mentioned encountering phenomena that challenged our understanding of geography and physics. Most of these interviews were quickly retracted or dismissed as misquotes. But I found one audio recording from a 1947 radio interview that survived. I'd like to see that land beyond the pole. That area beyond the pole is the centre of the great unknown. There's an area beyond the pole that's larger than the United States and Mexico combined, and it's never been seen by human beings. Beyond the pole, larger than the United States and Mexico combined, never been seen. What did Byrd find down there? Audio recording, March 28th, 2024, personal device, Noah Carter. Sound of car engine, road noise. I'm driving to the meeting. I know it's stupid, but I have to know. Atlas contacted me again yesterday, said they had more information, video footage, actual proof. I've been losing my mind over this for 2 weeks. I can't focus at work. I keep looking over my shoulder. Yesterday I caught someone going through my desk. When I asked Janet about it, She said it was just routine security inspection, but we've never had routine security inspections before. My keycard access has been restricted too. I can't get into the archive systems anymore. When I tried to log in yesterday, I got an error message saying my credentials were under review. Janet claims it's just a system upgrade, but... Sound of turn signal, car slowing down. I'm here, 16th and Broadway. I can see the Starbucks. There's a woman sitting by the window, laptop open, wearing a red scarf. That's got to be Atlas. God, I hope I'm not making a huge mistake. Recording ends. Journal entry, March 28th, 2024. Written in hotel room, Denver Airport. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chen, and she used to work for NASA. Not just any job at NASA. She was a senior analyst in the Lunar and Planetary Science Division, with security clearance high enough to access the most sensitive satellite data from across the solar system. She worked there for 12 years before she found something that ended her career and nearly ended her life. We talked for 3 hours in that Starbucks, and then she drove me to a storage unit on the outskirts of Denver, where she kept what she called her insurance files. Boxes and boxes of documents, photographs, video footage, and digital storage devices containing what she claimed was proof of the largest cover-up in human history. The Earth isn't flat, she told me as she unlocked the storage unit, but it's not what they taught us in school either. It's enclosed, contained, and there are people who will kill to keep that secret. The first thing she showed me was a collection of photographs allegedly taken during Operation High Jump in 1947. Unlike the grainy, distant shots I'd found online, these were crisp, detailed images showing massive ice formations that didn't look natural. Perfectly smooth walls rising hundreds of feet out of the ocean. Geometric patterns carved into the ice. And in one photograph, something that made my blood run cold. A metal structure embedded in the ice wall, with what looked like a massive circular hatch or doorway. Admiral Byrd's expedition found this, Sarah explained, but it wasn't the first time humans had discovered the Antarctic barrier. There have been expeditions going back centuries. The Vikings called it the ice wall at the world's end. Ancient maps from cultures that never should have had contact with each other all show the same thing, a circular landmass surrounding the known world. She showed me more recent footage, taken by military drones and classified satellites. Video of the ice wall stretching to the horizon in both directions, perfectly consistent in height and appearance. Thermal imaging showing hollow spaces within the wall, suggesting it wasn't solid ice but some kind of constructed barrier with ice as camouflage. Most disturbing were the videos of military aircraft patrolling the area, unmarked jets flying in precise patterns along the wall, and what appeared to be permanent installations built into the ice. Structures with radio towers, landing strips and personnel moving between buildings. They've been guarding it for decades, Sarah said. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959 wasn't about scientific cooperation. It was about making sure no civilian expeditions could get close enough to see what's really there. Every country with the technology to reach Antarctica has agreed to maintain the secret. But why? I asked. What's the point of hiding an ice wall? Even if the Earth is different than we thought, why does it matter? Sarah pulled out one last piece of evidence. A video file on an encrypted drive. Because of what's on the other side, she said. The video was taken by a military drone, timestamp showing December 2019. It showed the drone approaching the ice wall from the ocean side, flying along its base until it reached what looked like a gap, a channel cut through the wall, barely wide enough for the drone to pass through. On the other side was not an endless ice sheet extending to the South Pole. On the other side was open ocean, land masses, and what appeared to be a completely different sky. The horizon was wrong. The light was wrong. And in the distance, structures that were unmistakably artificial. Geometric shapes that could only be cities or installations of unknown origin. This footage was taken by a joint US-Russian expedition, Sarah explained. It was classified immediately, and everyone involved was transferred to non-critical assignments. But I had access to the raw files before they were scrubbed. I watched the video 3 times, trying to process what I was seeing. The implications were staggering. If this was real, then everything we thought we knew about geography, about the size and shape of our world, was a lie. How many people know? I asked. More than you'd think, fewer than you'd hope. There are people in every major government, every space agency, every military organisation who are part of the containment effort. But most of them only know pieces of the puzzle. Compartmentalisation is key to maintaining the secret. And the people who've tried to expose it, Sarah's expression darkened. Some disappear. Some have accidents. Some are discredited so thoroughly that no one takes them seriously even when they're telling the truth. The flat earth movement online, half of it is intentional disinformation, designed to make anyone asking questions about Antarctic exploration look like a lunatic. She handed me a copy of the encrypted drive and a folder of documents. "I'm leaving the country tomorrow," she said. "I've pushed my luck too far by contacting you. But you have the evidence now. What you do with it is up to you." "Why me?" I asked. "Why reach out to someone with no influence, no platform, no credibility?" "Because you found the edge on your own. You weren't looking for a conspiracy. You just saw something that didn't make sense and kept digging. That kind of intellectual honesty is rare, and because you have access to current satellite data that most of us don't." She stood up to leave, then turned back. "Noah, if you decide to pursue this, you need to understand what you're risking. This isn't about proving a theory or winning an argument. This is about something that powerful people consider a threat to the stability of human civilization. They will not hesitate to destroy your life to protect it." I haven't seen Sarah since that meeting. Her phone number is disconnected, her email address bounces back, and when I tried to look up her NASA employment record, I found no evidence that Dr. Sarah Chen had ever worked there. But I still have the drive, I still have the documents, and I still have access to satellite data that might show me more. I'm writing this from a hotel room near Denver Airport. Tomorrow I'm flying to Chile, then to Ushuaia, Argentina, the southernmost city in the world. From there, I'm going to try to book passage on one of the tourist ships that sail toward Antarctica. I have to see it for myself. I have to know if Sarah was telling the truth, or if I've fallen down a rabbit hole of delusion and paranoia. But first, I'm going to mail copies of everything to 5 different people in 5 different countries. If something happens to me, at least the evidence will survive. Email, March 30th, 2024. Autosend delayed delivery from noahcarter.backup@redacted. 2 multiple recipients. If you're reading this, it means I haven't returned from my trip to Antarctica, or I've been prevented from cancelling this autosend email. Attached you'll find satellite imagery, declassified documents, and video footage that suggest our understanding of Antarctic geography is fundamentally incorrect. The evidence points to a massive cover-up involving multiple governments and international organisations. I'm not asking you to believe this immediately. I'm asking you to examine the evidence objectively and ask yourself why such extensive efforts would be made to restrict civilian access to a region that's supposedly nothing but empty ice. Share this information carefully. Based on what I've learned, people who get too close to this truth tend to have serious problems. Noah Carter, P.S. The Flat Earth people aren't entirely wrong. They're not entirely right either, but they're a lot closer to the truth than NASA wants you to believe. Video transcript, April 3rd, 2024. Recorded on phone camera, Ushuaia, Argentina. Shaky camera footage showing Noah in what appears to be a small hotel room. He looks tired, unshaven, paranoid. Day 3 in Ushuaia. This place is supposed to be the end of the world, and it feels like it. Everything south of here is just unknown. I've been trying to book passage on one of the Antarctic cruise ships, but it's not as easy as I thought. The legitimate tour companies only go to specific approved areas. The Antarctic Peninsula, some islands, places where tourists can see penguins and take photos of icebergs. None of them go anywhere near the coordinates I'm interested in. But I found someone who might help. A guy named Dmitry, Russian, runs what he calls alternative expeditions. For people who want to see parts of Antarctica that aren't on the tourist maps. He's expensive as hell, and he made it very clear that anyone who goes with him is taking serious risks. No insurance, no official permits, no rescue guarantee if something goes wrong. Perfect. We're leaving tomorrow night on a converted fishing vessel called the Meridian. Dmitry says we'll be travelling with a small group, some researchers who couldn't get official permits, a photographer who's documenting climate change, and a couple of what he called truth seekers who are looking for the same things I am. I asked him directly if he knew about the ice wall. He just smiled and said, "In Antarctica, you see many things that aren't supposed to exist." Camera pans to show maps spread on the bed with coordinates marked in red ink. I've been studying the coordinates from the satellite images, cross-referencing them with historical expedition routes and the areas that are off-limits to civilian traffic. There's a pattern. All the restricted zones form a rough circle around the continent, exactly matching the areas where Admiral Byrd reported seeing phenomena beyond normal geographic boundaries. If Sarah was right, if there really is some kind of barrier or wall down there, then we should encounter it somewhere around 78 degrees south latitude. That's still 400 miles from the theoretical South Pole, but it's also well beyond any approved tourist routes. Long pause, Noah rubbing his eyes. I keep wondering if I'm losing my mind. 3 weeks ago I was a normal guy with a normal job, processing routine satellite data. Now I'm about to sail into restricted Antarctic waters looking for evidence of... what? A conspiracy? An alien structure? A literal edge of the world? But I can't let it go. Even if I'm wrong, even if this is all some elaborate hoax or psychological operation, I have to know. I've seen too much to just pretend it never happened. Camera shows Noah's laptop screen with encrypted files. I've been reviewing Sarah's files again. There are details I missed before, references to something called the Guardians, apparently a joint international task force specifically assigned to monitor the Antarctic barrier. Military personnel from the US, Russia, UK, Australia and Chile, all working together despite their government's official tensions. There are also mentions of containment protocols for civilians who get too close to sensitive areas. Most are just turned back or arrested for permit violations, but some are listed as requiring permanent information security measures. I don't know what that means and I don't want to find out. Recording ends abruptly. Ship's log, MV Meridian, April 5th, 2024, Captain Dmitry Volkov. Personal notes. Day 1, departed Ushuaia, 2300 hours. Passenger manifest, 6 souls plus crew of 4. Weather favourable, seas calm. ETA to research coordinates, 72 hours. The American passenger, Carter, is nervous but determined. He's shown me satellite imagery that I recognise. Same type of photos that ended my career with the Russian Antarctic research program 15 years ago. Some truths are worth risking everything to find. Others will destroy you. I haven't told him about the last expedition I guided to these waters. 3 passengers went out with me in 2019. Only 1 came back, and he spent 6 months in a psychiatric facility before disappearing entirely. The others, officially, they were lost in a storm. Unofficially, they saw something that made the authorities very interested in ensuring they never spoke to anyone again. Carter deserves to know what he's heading toward, but he wouldn't turn back even if I told him. I recognise that look in his eyes, the same one I had when I first saw the classified footage from Operation High Jump. Journal entry, April 7th, 2024, written aboard MV Meridian. Second day at sea, and the world already feels different. We're travelling in radio silence, using only basic navigation equipment. Dmitry says that GPS becomes unreliable once you pass 70 degrees south latitude, and that satellite communications are actively monitored by what he calls interested parties. He's equipped the ship with older analogue navigation tools, compass, sextant, dead reckoning, that can't be tracked or interfered with remotely. The other passengers are an interesting group. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, no relation to the politician, is a glaciologist who lost her research grants after publishing papers suggesting that Antarctic ice formation patterns were inconsistent with natural processes. Marcus Webb is a documentary filmmaker who's been researching government cover-ups for 20 years. And then there's a quiet older man named Henry, who claims to be a retired Navy officer, though he won't say what his rank was or what he did during his service. Henry is the most interesting. He carries himself like military, speaks with precise, measured words, and seems to know more about our destination than he's letting on. When I showed the group my satellite imagery yesterday, Henry looked at it for a long time without saying anything. Finally, he just nodded and said, "Yep, that's it. That's the wall." You've seen it before? I asked. Son, he said, I've spent the last 30 years trying to forget what I saw down there. But some things stick with you whether you want them to or not. We're still 200 miles from the coordinates where I first spotted the anomaly in the satellite data. But already, things feel wrong. The sky has an odd quality to it. Too bright in some directions, too dark in others, as if the light is coming from sources that don't match the sun's position. The ocean colour is changing too, shifting from deep blue to an almost metallic grey-green. And the temperature isn't dropping as much as it should. We're well into the Southern Ocean now, approaching the Antarctic Circle, but it's only slightly colder than it was when we left Argentina. Dr. Warren has been taking measurements, and she says the water temperature is at least 10 degrees warmer than it should be at this latitude. It's like there's a heat source ahead of us, she told me this morning, something warming the water from below. Dmitri just smiles when we ask him about these anomalies. Antarctic is full of surprises, he says, many things science cannot explain. Tonight we should reach the edge of the restricted zone. Dmitri says we'll know we're close when the compass stops working properly and we start seeing aircraft overhead. He's warned us that if we encounter military vessels, we're to stay below deck and let him handle any communications. I'm scared. But I'm also more excited than I've ever been in my life. After weeks of wondering whether I was chasing shadows and delusions, I'm finally going to get answers. Audio recording, April 8th, 2024, 3:15 hours. Recorded on phone, Noah Carter. Sound of ocean waves, wind, ship engines. Something's happening. I'm up on deck. Everyone else is asleep except Dmitri and the helmsman. We've been sailing for about 6 hours since dinner, and... Long pause. The compass is spinning. Not slowly drifting off course. Spinning freely like there's no magnetic field at all. Dmitri says this is normal when you get close to what he calls the anomaly zone. But it's terrifying to watch our primary navigation tool just stop working. And there are lights ahead. Not stars, not the aurora. Lights on the horizon that are too regular, too organised to be natural phenomena. They look almost like city lights, but we're supposed to be in the middle of empty ocean. Sound of footsteps on deck. Dimitri's coming up here. He looks worried, which is not reassuring since he's been completely calm about everything else so far. We're close now, he just told me. Very close. You should wake the others. They will want to see this. See what? What are we about to? Recording cuts off. Video transcript. April 8th, 2024, 4:30 hours. Camera. Marcus Webb. Documentary filmmaker. Shaky handheld footage showing the deck of the ship. All passengers are gathered at the rail looking south. The sky ahead has an unnatural quality. Too bright, with strange aurora-like effects that don't match typical Southern Lights patterns. Marcus, behind camera. This is Marcus Webb, April 8th, 2024, approximately 4:30 a.m. local time. We're aboard the MV Meridian, roughly 78 degrees south latitude, 165 degrees west longitude. What we're seeing ahead of us is, I don't have words for it. Camera pans across the group. Noah is staring ahead with his mouth open. Dr. Warren is taking measurements with various instruments. Henry, the retired Navy officer, is standing very still with his arms crossed. Dr. Warren, temperature's rising. We're gaining almost 2 degrees every nautical mile we travel south. This violates every model of Antarctic climate I've ever studied. Dmitri, from the ship's wheel. Lights ahead. You see them now. Camera zooms in on the horizon. There are definitely artificial lights visible. Not scattered randomly, but arranged in patterns that suggest structures or installations. Noah, those are buildings. Those are actual buildings out there. Henry, not buildings. Guard posts. We're approaching the perimeter. Marcus, Henry, what do you mean by perimeter? What kind of perimeter? Henry, the kind that's been keeping people like you away from the truth for the last 70 years. Camera swings to show Henry's face. He looks grim but not surprised. Henry, I was stationed here in 1994, Joint Task Force, officially designated as Antarctic Research Security. Our job was to monitor the barrier and ensure that no unauthorized personnel got close enough to see what you're about to see. Dr. Warren. What barrier? Henry, what are you talking about? Before Henry can answer, there's a loud humming sound that seems to come from everywhere at once. Everyone on deck looks around, trying to identify the source. Dmitri. Engine off. We drift now. The ship's engines cut out, leaving only the sound of waves and wind, but the humming continues, growing louder. Noah. There! Look there! Camera swings to where Noah is pointing. On the horizon, a thin dark line is becoming visible against the strange bright sky. As they watch, the line grows taller and more defined. Marcus. Jesus Christ, that's a wall, that's an actual wall. The dark line continues to grow as they drift closer. It's clearly artificial, too straight, too uniform, too tall to be a natural ice formation. The humming sound is getting louder, and now there are other sounds mixed in. Mechanical noises like machinery running. Dr. Warren. It has to be at least 300 feet high, maybe 400, and it extends... God, it extends as far as I can see in both directions. Henry. Welcome to the Antarctic barrier, folks. The biggest secret on Earth. Camera zooms in on the wall. The surface appears to be made of ice, but there are clearly artificial structures embedded within it. Metal frameworks, what look like observation posts, and equipment that's definitely not natural. Noah. This is it. This is what I saw in the satellite imagery, but it's so much bigger than I imagined. Suddenly there are new sounds, aircraft engines approaching from multiple directions. Dmitri. Military aircraft, 3 of them coming fast. Everyone looks up to see helicopters approaching from the direction of the wall. Henry. This is where things get complicated, people. I suggest you put away the cameras and let me do the talking. Marcus. Like hell. This is the discovery of the century. I'm not stopping now. The helicopters are getting closer, and searchlights begin sweeping the water around the ship. Henry, you don't understand. These people don't arrest trespassers. They make them disappear. Recording ends abruptly as the searchlight hits the camera. Incident report. Classification level. Cosmic Operation Antarctic Shield. Perimeter Security Division. Date, April 8th, 2024. Reporting Officer, Colonel James Morrison, Task Force Guardian. At 0447 hours, perimeter sensors detected unauthorized civilian vessel at coordinates 78 degrees 41 minutes south, 165 degrees 28 minutes west, approximately 2.3 nautical miles from the Antarctic barrier. Vessel identified as MV Meridian, Registry Argentina, under command of known security risk Dmitri Volkov. Passenger manifest obtained through surveillance includes Noah Carter, primary target, satellite analyst, Meridian Aerospace, Dr. Elizabeth Warren, glaciologist, security risk level 3, Marcus Webb, documentary filmmaker, security risk level 4, and Henry Patterson, former USN classified clearance expired. Containment Protocol 7 was initiated immediately. All passengers were extracted and transported to Facility Omega for processing. Vessel was scuttled using standard cover story. Engine fire. Lost at sea. Of particular concern, Carter had extensive photographic and video documentation of satellite anomalies, consistent with Operation Horizon Edge intelligence leaks. Source of leak remains unidentified, but poses significant security risk. Recommendation: Carter and Webb to be processed under permanent information security protocols. Warren and Patterson to be relocated under new identities following memory modification procedures. Volkov to be returned to Russian custody with cover story of rescue from maritime accident. Personal audio log: Noah Carter. Date unknown. Location: Facility Omega. Recorded on concealed device. Muffled audio, sounds of footsteps on metal flooring, distant mechanical noises. I don't know what day it is. I don't know where I am. They took my watch, my phone, everything. But I managed to hide this recording device in the lining of my jacket. We're in some kind of underground facility built into the ice wall. The architecture is wrong, too advanced. Some of the corridors are clearly human-built, but others look like they were carved out of something that was already here. The walls have symbols etched into them, geometric patterns that don't match any human language I've ever seen. They've separated us. I haven't seen Marcus or Dr. Warren since they brought us here. Henry they seem to know. They called him by name and took him somewhere else immediately. The man in charge introduced himself as Colonel Morrison. He knows everything about me, my job, my family, my search for the satellite anomalies. He even knew about Sarah Chen, though he claimed she was a former employee who suffered a psychological breakdown and created an elaborate fantasy to cope with her dismissal. But he showed me things, Noah. Things that make Sarah's evidence look like children's drawings. We're not just dealing with an ice wall. The barrier is artificial, but it's not human. At least not entirely human. Morrison took me to what he called the observation deck, a room built into the wall itself with massive windows looking out over whatever's on the other side. I can see why they keep this secret. What's beyond the barrier isn't just unexplored territory, it's impossible territory. The horizon curves upward instead of downward. The sky has a different colour, and there are structures in the distance that are clearly artificial but don't look like anything humans could build. This is why we exist, Morrison told me. This is why the Antarctic Treaty was signed, why satellite imagery is edited, why people like you are prevented from sharing what you've found. Humanity isn't ready for this truth. What truth? I asked. That Earth isn't what we think it is. That we're living in something much smaller and much stranger than anyone imagines. And that we're not alone. He showed me more footage. Military expeditions going back to the 1940s, all documenting the same thing. Encounters with technology and entities that are clearly not human. Admiral Byrd's expedition didn't just find an ice wall. They found evidence of a civilization that's been here much longer than we have. The barrier isn't keeping us in, Morrison explained. It's keeping them out. And as long as the general population doesn't know about it, we can maintain the balance that's kept our species safe for the last century. They want me to sign documents, non-disclosure agreements that are backed up by threats that go way beyond legal consequences. They're offering me a new identity, a new life, a job with one of their front organisations. All I have to do is forget everything I've learned and never speak about it again. But I can't do that. Not after seeing what I've seen. Sound of approaching footsteps. Someone's coming. I have to hide this device again. Recording ends. Facility Omega. Medical report. Patient Noah Carter. Date April 12th, 2024. Supervising physician Dr. Amanda Cross. Patient continues to resist standard memory modification procedures. Psychological profile indicates unusually strong retention of traumatic memories, possibly due to his background in data analysis and pattern recognition. Standard pharmaceutical intervention, class 3 amnesiacs, have proven ineffective. Patient retains detailed memories of satellite imagery, contact with Chen, Sarah, C-file TC4471X, and recent exposure to barrier zone phenomena. Recommendation: escalate to experimental procedures. Patient's knowledge of classified satellite data makes him a significant security risk if released with intact memories. Alternative solutions may be necessary. Note: Patient has been asking repeatedly about the hatch in the wall. This suggests he may have observed more during his facility tour than was intended. Recommend limiting his access to observation areas pending final disposition. Audio recording. Date unknown. Source: hidden surveillance device. Location: Facility Omega. Conference Room Alpha. Multiple voices. Official meeting in progress. Morrison. Containment has been compromised at multiple levels. The Chen incident was supposed to be resolved, but now we have a civilian with documentary evidence and the technical background to understand its implications. Unknown voice 1. What about the journalist? Webb? Morrison. Webb is no longer a concern. His footage was corrupted during extraction, and he suffered complications during the memory modification procedure. Unknown voice 2. Complications? Morrison. He won't be remembering anything about Antarctica or anything else. Long pause. Unknown voice 1 and Carter. Morrison. Carter is the real problem. His psychological profile shows resistance to standard procedures, and there's something else. During his observation tour he noticed the sealed section, the area we don't even tell most of our own people about. Unknown voice 2. The gateway? Morrison. He saw the hatch, asked questions about the symbols around it. if he starts connecting those observations to the historical data Chen gave him. Unknown voice. 1. Then we have a potential revelation event. How many people has he contacted? Morrison. His email logs show automated messages sent to 5 recipients in different countries. We've intercepted most of them, but at least one got through. Someone in northern Canada received the full data package. Sound of papers shuffling. Unknown voice 2. Recommendations. Morrison. Permanent solution. Carter knows too much, and he's already demonstrated that he won't accept any agreement to remain silent. The risk is too great. Unknown voice. 1. What about the broader containment issue? How many more satellite analysts have access to the raw Antarctic data? Morrison. We're implementing new protocols. All Antarctic satellite processing will be moved to facilities under direct military control. No more civilian contractors will have access to unfiltered imagery south of 70 degrees. Unknown voice 2. And the other passengers from the Meridian? Morrison. Warren has agreed to the relocation program. New identity, new life. Memory modification was successful. She thinks she was rescued from a research accident and suffered temporary amnesia. Patterson is back with his handlers. Turns out he was working for us all along, keeping tabs on Volkov's activities. Unknown voice. 1. So Carter is the loose end. Morrison. Carter is the loose end. I'll handle it personally. Recording ends. Final journal entry, Noah Carter. Date, April 15th, 2024. Location, unknown. If you're reading this, then I'm probably dead. I've hidden this journal in a place where I hope someone might eventually find it. The walls of this facility are old, older than the human structures built into them. There are gaps, spaces between the artificial additions and whatever was here before. I've wedged this notebook into one of those gaps, along with the memory card from my hidden recording device. They're going to kill me tonight. I overheard Morrison talking to his superiors. They can't risk letting me live with what I know, and they can't successfully erase my memories. So they're going with what Morrison called the permanent solution. But before I die, I need to document what I've learned. Not just about the ice wall or the cover-up, but about what's really happening here. The Antarctic barrier isn't just a wall, it's a gateway, and it's not keeping things out, it's keeping us in. During my last day here, Morrison made a mistake. He wanted to show me exactly why the secret had to be maintained, why people like me couldn't be allowed to share what we'd discovered. He took me to the sealed section of the facility, the area they call the gateway. The hatch I'd glimpsed before is massive, easily 50 feet in diameter, made of a metal that doesn't look like anything human technology could produce. The surface is covered with symbols that seem to shift and change when you're not looking directly at them, and it's humming with the same frequency I first heard when we approached the barrier. This has been here since before recorded history, Morrison told me. Every ancient civilization has stories about it. The Norse called it the gate to Jormungandr's realm. The Aboriginals spoke of the rainbow serpent's prison. The Mayans wrote about the place where the sky meets the earth. What's on the other side? I asked. Morrison was quiet for a long time. Then he said, the rest of reality. We're not living on a planet, Carter. We're living inside something. And this, he gestured to the hatch, this is the only way out. He showed me more classified files, expeditions that had managed to open the hatch briefly before being forced to seal it again. On the other side isn't Antarctica as we understand it, or even another part of Earth. It's somewhere else entirely, somewhere vast and populated by intelligences that make our technology look like stone tools. The first expedition through was in 1947, Morrison explained. Bird's people found the hatch and managed to activate it. What they saw on the other side convinced them that humanity wasn't ready for contact. The barrier, the secrecy, the cover-up, it was all designed to buy us time to develop as a species before we have to face what's really out there. And the flat earth theories? Disinformation. Mix truth with absurdity and people dismiss both. Let conspiracy theorists argue about the shape of the planet while ignoring the real question. What's beyond the edges we've defined for ourselves? I asked him the question that had been haunting me since I first saw that satellite image. Why show me this? Why not just kill me quietly? Morrison looked genuinely sad when he answered. Because you deserve to understand what you discovered, and because someone needs to know the full truth, even if they can't share it. He told me that there are others like me, people who've stumbled onto pieces of the secret over the decades. Most are handled with memory modification or relocation, but a few, the ones who see too much or understand too much, are brought here for final briefing before their permanent information security measures. The truth is, Morrison said, we're running out of time. The technology on the other side of that hatch is advancing faster than ours. Sooner or later, they're going to find a way to open it from their side. When that happens, the age of human independence ends. Then why not tell the world? Why not prepare everyone? Because the world would panic. Governments would collapse. Civilization would tear itself apart before we ever had to face what's coming through that hatch. I don't know if Morrison was telling me the truth or if this is all an elaborate psychological operation designed to break down my resistance to their procedures. But I've seen too much, documented too much, to dismiss it as fantasy. The Earth might not be flat, but it's not the spinning ball in space that we've been taught about either. We're living inside something, a contained environment, a terrarium, maybe even a prison. And somewhere beyond the ice wall that surrounds our known world, there are intelligences that have been watching us develop for centuries. Morrison and his people aren't the villains in this story. They're the guards. They're trying to protect humanity from a truth that might destroy us. But they're also preventing us from growing into whatever we need to become to survive what's coming. I've made my choice. I'd rather die knowing the truth than live believing a lie. If you find this journal, if you read these words, then please, don't dismiss what I've documented as the ravings of a disturbed mind. Look at the evidence I've compiled. Follow the coordinates I've provided. Ask questions about Antarctic research restrictions and satellite imagery processing. But be careful. Be smarter than I was. Don't trust anyone completely, and don't underestimate how far powerful people will go to protect secrets they believe are necessary for human survival. The edge of everything isn't where we thought it was. It's not a place you can fall off or sail beyond. It's a boundary that's been carefully maintained to keep us safe from something we're not ready to face, whether that protection is justified or whether it's keeping us from our destiny. That's a question I'll never be able to answer, but maybe you can. Noah Carter last entry, hospital record, excerpt patient, John Doe number 4471, location, Hospital Privado Austral, Ushuaia, Argentina, date April 18th, 2024. Patient was found unconscious on beach approximately 15 kilometers east of Ushuaia, suffering from severe hypothermia and dehydration. No identification found. Patient claims his name is Noah Carter and that he was aboard a vessel called MV Meridian that was lost at sea during an Antarctic expedition. No record of any vessel by that name departing from Ushuaia in the past month. Patient exhibits signs of memory confusion and possible traumatic brain injury. Claims to have documentary evidence of Antarctic conspiracy, but no such materials were found with patient. Psychological evaluation indicates possible delusional disorder triggered by trauma. Patient repeatedly asks about satellite data and icewall footage that apparently do not exist. Patient has no verifiable identity. No employment records found for Noah Carter at any aerospace company. No family members have come forward despite media appeals. Recommended for psychiatric evaluation and eventual transfer to long-term care facility if identity cannot be established. Forum post r/conspiracy, username icewall, truth47, posted May 2nd, 2024. I know most of you will dismiss this as fantasy, but I need to share what happened to me. 3 weeks ago, I woke up in a hospital in Argentina with no memory of how I got there. They said I was found on a beach, nearly dead from exposure. But I remember everything else. I remember working as a satellite analyst. I remember finding anomalies in Antarctic imagery. I remember meeting a woman named Sarah Chen, who showed me evidence of a massive cover-up. I remember sailing to the edge of the world and finding something that changed everything I thought I knew about reality. The problem is, none of it can be verified. My employment records are gone. My apartment was apparently cleaned out months ago due to non-payment of rent. My bank accounts are closed. According to every official record, Noah Carter never existed. But I have memories. Detailed, consistent memories of discoveries that explain why so much Antarctic research is classified, why satellite imagery south of certain latitudes is heavily edited, why no civilian expeditions are allowed to explore freely in Antarctic waters. I've tried posting this story on multiple platforms. The posts get deleted, my accounts get suspended. I've tried contacting journalists, researchers, anyone who might listen. No one returns my calls. So I'm posting this here, on the one forum where people at least consider the possibility that official narratives might not tell the whole truth. The Earth isn't flat, but it's not what they taught us in school either. We're living inside something much stranger, much more contained than we've been led to believe, and there are people, good people, trying to protect us who will do anything to keep that truth hidden. I don't expect you to believe me, but if any of you have connections to Antarctic research, to satellite data processing, to anyone with access to classified imagery of the southernmost regions of our world, ask questions. Look for the gaps in the data. Follow the coordinates that don't appear on public maps. And if you find something that doesn't make sense, something that suggests our geography textbooks are missing crucial information, be careful who you tell. Be smarter than I was. Some truths are more dangerous than lies. A friend from the edge. This post was removed by moderators for violating community guidelines. Final audio log, unknown. Date recovered from encrypted cloud storage, auto-uploaded from unknown device. Static, then a familiar voice. Weaker than before, but definitely Noah Carter. This is my final recording. I don't know if anyone will ever hear this, but I need to leave something behind. Some record of what really happened. They didn't kill me. That might have been kinder. Instead, they erased me. Completely. Noah Carter, satellite analyst, never existed. The man who found evidence of the Antarctic barrier, who sailed to the edge of the known world, who discovered that humanity is living inside something much stranger than we've been taught. That man was deleted from reality as thoroughly as a computer file. But they made a mistake. They couldn't erase everything. Memories persist. Truth has a way of surviving even the most complete cover-ups. I'm recording this from an internet cafe in a small town whose name I won't mention. I have no money, no identification, no official existence, but I have the coordinates. I have the satellite image burned into my memory. I have knowledge of the greatest secret in human history. And I'm not the only one. Over the past weeks I've been contacted by others. People who found fragments of the truth. Pieces of the puzzle that doesn't fit the official narrative of our world. Scientists who've noticed inconsistencies in Antarctic data. Military personnel who've been stationed at facilities they're not supposed to talk about. Families of researchers who disappeared while working on classified projects. We're forming a network, quietly, carefully, staying below the threshold of attention that would trigger another containment operation. We're gathering evidence, documenting anomalies, and preparing for the day when the truth can no longer be suppressed. Because Morrison was right about one thing, time is running out. The technology on the other side of that barrier is advancing, and sooner or later, the question won't be whether humanity is ready for the truth. The question will be whether we're ready for what's coming. To anyone listening to this, the edge of everything isn't where you think it is. It's not a place you can fall off or sail beyond. It's a carefully maintained boundary between what we know and what we're not allowed to know. But boundaries were made to be crossed, and someday we will cross this one. Tonight, I'll be your guide on a journey into one of the coldest and most enduring mysteries of the Cold War era. I want you to picture this. It's a winter night deep in the Ural Mountains in 1959. A group of young adventurers huddles in a tent on the snowy slope of a peak ominously called Dead Mountain. They're laughing, jotting down journal entries by flashlight, and planning tomorrow's trek. They don't know it yet, but this will be their last night alive. This is the true story of the Dyatlov Pass incident, a mystery that has haunted investigators for decades. My name is James, and I've spent weeks poring over old case files, diaries, and witness reports about what happened to those 9 hikers in 1959. The more I dig, the more the Dyatlov Pass incident feels like a nightmare straddling the line between fact and fiction. So, let's delve into it together step by step as if we're investigators unravelling a case file. The story begins in late January 1959. 10 experienced ski hikers from the Ural Polytechnical Institute set out on an expedition to reach a mountain called a Torten in the northern Urals. They were all in their early 20s, 7 men and 2 women, except for one older instructor, and were led by a 23-year-old radio engineering student named Igor Dyatlov. On January 23, 1959, the Dyatlov group received their route book and left the city of Sverdlovsk, today's Yekaterinburg, by train. You can imagine them on that train, excited, full of youthful bravado, maybe singing along to a mandolin one of them brought for the journey. After 2 days on trains, the party reached Ivdel, a remote town at the edge of the northern Ural Mountains, which also housed a Soviet Gulag camp for criminals. From Ivdel, they travelled by bus and then hitched a ride in the back of a woodcutter's truck to a settlement called Vizhai, the last inhabited village to the north. The locals in Vizhai must have looked at these university students with a mix of admiration and concern. The route they planned to traverse was rated Category 3, the most difficult, and they were attempting it in February, the cruelest time of year. On January 27th, the Dyatlov group left Vizhai and began their trek into the wilderness. One member, Yuri Yudin, had been struggling with health issues. He had rheumatism and a congenital defect that caused knee pain. By January 28th, Yudin's joint pain became too severe. Reluctantly, he turned back toward Vizhai, unable to continue. He had no idea that by saving himself, he was sealing his fate as the expedition's sole survivor. Yuri Yudin would never see his friends alive again. The remaining 9 hikers pressed on into the wild, unaware of the fate that awaited them. Through diaries and photographs recovered later, investigators have pieced together their route. By January 31st, the group had reached the edge of a highland area and cached surplus food and equipment in a wooded valley to be used for the return trip. They joked around, took photos, and even made a little mock newspaper they titled The Evening Autoten, in which one entry humorously proclaimed, "From now on, we know that the snowmen exist," likely a tongue-in-cheek reference to local Yeti legends. Despite the exhaustion and cold, their spirits were high. On February 1st, the team started to move through a mountain pass, later named Dyatlov Pass after this incident, with the plan to camp on the other side that night. But the weather turned on them. A howling snowstorm and blinding wind caused Dyatlov's team to lose their direction on the barren slopes. Instead of crossing the pass into the shelter of the valley beyond, they had veered west, finding themselves on the flank of a mountain called Kholat Shakal, which in the local Mansi language means Dead Mountain. By the time they realised their mistake, it was late in the day, and visibility was near zero from the blowing snow. Rather than descend 1.5 kilometres down into the forest for cover, Igor Dyatlov decided to pitch their tent right there on the mountainside in the open. Perhaps he didn't want to lose the altitude they'd gained, or perhaps he wanted to prove they could handle camping on an exposed slope in a blizzard. The 9 of them set up their large tent on the bare snow, chopping into the slope for a flat spot. It was a decision that would be heavily scrutinised later. That evening of February 1st, 1959 must have been brutal. Temperatures were around minus 20 degrees Celsius, and winds roared over the pass. Still, inside the tent, the group was relatively secure. They had a warm dinner. Later forensic analysis of their stomach contents showed they ate around 6 to 7 p.m. In one of the last photos recovered from their cameras, they are seen joking and smiling as they set up camp in the twilight on February 1st. Despite the extreme cold and howling wind outside, they seemed in good spirits, jotting down journal entries and chatting as they settled in for the night. They could not have imagined the terror that was coming. Something happened in the dark early hours of February 2nd that changed everything. We don't have eyewitnesses to describe it. All we have is the evidence left behind, and that evidence reads like the opening scene of a horror film. Sometime after midnight, the tent was suddenly slashed open from the inside. The 9 campers, who had been sleeping or resting, burst out of their tent into a howling snowstorm in the pitch black of night. They left behind almost all their gear, boots, coats, hats, sleeping bags, axes, as if fleeing an imminent threat. Imagine the situation. It's minus 30 degrees Celsius, minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, outside, and yet something scared or startled them so badly that they ran out half-dressed and barefoot into the blizzard. Why? What could have terrified them, or otherwise compelled them to abandon their only shelter and run into certain death? That's the question investigators have grappled with for over 60 years. When the group failed to return to Vijay by February 12th as planned, there wasn't immediate alarm. Delays of a few days were common for such expeditions. But as day after day passed with no word, the hikers' families grew anxious. By February 20th, the relatives demanded a search and rescue operation. The Ural Polytechnic Institute sent student volunteers to scour the route, and soon the Soviet army and local militia police joined in, with planes and helicopters dispatched to aid the search. Rescuers faced brutal weather themselves, traversing deep snow and scanning miles of desolate terrain. Among the searchers was a student named Mikhail Sharavin, who on February 26th would make a chilling discovery. On February 26th, 1959, Sharavin's search team was moving along the slopes of Kolatchakal when he spotted something odd sticking out of the snow. As they got closer, they realised it was a corner of the missing group's tent, collapsed and half buried in the snow. Sharavin used an ice pick to hack open the tent's entrance, which was blocked with snow. The sight inside the tent baffled him. The tent's canvas had been slashed open from the inside with a knife, and although it was damaged and partially snow-filled, almost all the hikers' belongings were still neatly arranged inside. He found blankets and coats laid out, a row of boots, axes and flashlights set to the sides, a map and official papers, a little pile of money and even a flask of alcohol. In one corner was a plate with slices of sayalo, pork fat, as if someone had been in the middle of fixing a snack. It was like a snapshot frozen in time. The tent felt orderly, not like it had been ripped apart by an external force. Sharavin later said it was as if the campers had been interrupted in the middle of dinner, then fled in a rush. The scene sent shivers down his spine. Why would experienced hikers cut open their only shelter and run away without boots or coats? Outside the tent, the search team found footprints in the snow, and they only deepened the mystery. There were 9 sets of prints, which matched the number of missing hikers. They could see the impressions of feet wearing only socks, or a single shoe, and some barefoot. You could even make out toe marks in the frozen snow. The tracks indicated that the hikers had not run in a wild panic, but rather walked fast or at a hurried shuffle down the slope, in an organised single file. The rescuers followed these tracks downhill in the direction of a dense forest. Incredibly, the footprints continued for about 500 metres before they were obscured by fresh snow. It was as if the group had intentionally headed toward the forest, perhaps seeking shelter or regrouping. Sharavin and the others were utterly perplexed. What on earth could have made these seasoned hikers leave their tent in sub-zero cold, partially dressed and even barefoot, walking away calmly into the night? With dusk approaching on February 26th, the searchers had to pause the search until morning, haunted by the enigma they'd uncovered. The next day, the search parties fanned out from the tent down toward the forest. At the forest's edge, under a large Siberian cedar tree, Sharavin and his comrades found the charred remains of a small fire. Near that fire lay the first 2 bodies. What they saw defied explanation. Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy, Yuri Krivonishenko, were found side by side in the snow, shoeless and dressed only in their underwear. The branches on the cedar above them were broken up to 5 meters high, as if someone had climbed up into the tree. Indeed, bits of skin and torn clothing were found on the bark. It looked like one of them had frantically clambered up the cedar, either to get a better view of the area, perhaps trying to spot the tent in the dark, or to escape something. Krivonishenko's corpse had burns on parts of his body, and in a grim detail he had a piece of flesh missing from his right hand. It turned out he had bitten off a chunk of his own knuckle, possibly in an attempt to stay conscious or stifle a scream while dying of cold. Both men's hands and feet were deep reddish brown, a sign of frostbite, and maybe the last attempt to warm their limbs by the fire. The tree's branches had been stripped for kindling, but the fire they managed to build was small and had burned out by the time they died. The image of these two friends huddled by a dead fire, slowly freezing to death in their underwear under a sky of endless black, is something I can't easily shake off. About 300 meters away from the cedar tree, toward the tent, the searchers found the body of Igor Dyatlov. He was lying face up in the snow, head oriented toward the tent up the slope, as if he had been trying to crawl back that way. Dyatlov was better dressed than the two under the tree. He wore a flannel shirt, a sweater, and pants, but notably, he had no coat and no boots, only socks on his feet. One arm was frozen upright, reaching toward the sky, clutching a small birch branch. His other hand was pressed to his chest. People who saw his body remarked that he appeared to be protecting something in his jacket or close to his heart. Perhaps a photograph or his notebook, though nothing of note was found on his chest. His face, when they cleared the snow, was strangely calm, eyes open. Not far from Dyatlov, searchers found Zinaida Zina Kolmogorova, a 22-year-old female student in the group. Zina was better dressed than Igor. She had on 2 sweaters and 2 pants, but she too lacked boots, wearing only socks. Her body was turned toward the tent and her arms were extended forward, bent at the elbows, as if she had been crawling uphill on her stomach, desperately trying to get back to the tent before the cold overtook her. On Zina's right side, the searchers noted a long, bright red bruise running along her torso, resembling a blunt force injury from a baton or the butt of a rifle. It was an odd injury to see, given that she had no other major external wounds. It took a few more days until March 5th to find Rustem Slobodin, the last of these first 5 bodies. Slobodin, 23, was discovered face down in the snow about 480 meters from the cedar, roughly halfway back toward the tent. He was dressed more warmly than the others. He had a long-sleeve undershirt, a sweater, 2 pairs of pants, 4 pairs of socks, and 1 felt-lined boot on his right foot, but his head was bare and his left foot was only in a sock. In his right hand, Slobodin clenched a small pocket knife, closed. An autopsy would later reveal that Slobodin had a fracture in his skull, about 7 inches long, consistent with a blunt impact. However, this crack in his skull was not deemed a fatal wound. The medical examiner thought Rustem could have sustained it during a fall and continued moving for at least an hour afterward. Like Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, Doroshenko and Krivonishenko, Rustem Slobodin ultimately died of hypothermia. In fact, the first 5 bodies found all had no life-threatening external injuries. They had perished from the unforgiving cold. Slobodin's watch was found shattered and stopped at 8:45, though it's unclear if that was 8:45 a.m. or p.m, or even 8:45 on a different date. It was as if time itself froze at that moment. Now imagine being Yuri Yudin, the one who had turned back, called in to identify the bodies of your friends. One by one, the first 5 corpses were airlifted to the morgue in Ivdel for autopsy and identification. Yudin, with a heavy heart, confirmed their identities. But 4 members of the Dyatlov party were still missing. Weeks passed with no sign of them. The winter snows began to melt under the early spring sun. It wasn't until May, nearly 3 months later, that nature revealed the remaining victims, turning the mystery into something even more haunting. On May 4th, a Mansi tribesman named Kurin and his dog were assisting the search, when the dog picked up a scent near a rocky ravine further into the woods from the cedar tree. About 75 meters beyond the cedar and 1,500 meters from the tent, in a snow-filled ravine, searchers discovered a few torn pieces of clothing on a branch. Digging down, they uncovered the final 4 bodies buried under nearly 4 meters of snow. These were Lyudmila, Lyuda Dubinina, Semyon, Alexander, Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Alexander Kolevatov. They were lying about 75 meters further into the forest from the cedar, at the bottom of that ravine. Notably, 3 of the 4 were better dressed than the others, and it appeared they had taken clothes from those who died earlier. Dubinina, for example, was found wearing Krivonishenko's torn and burned brown trousers, and her foot was wrapped in a piece of his wool sweater. Zolotaryov, the 38-year-old, was found wearing Dubinina's faux fur coat and hat. Kolevatov had put on a spare sweater and pants, likely from one of the others. This exchange of clothing suggests that when some members of the group died, the last survivors stripped the dead of usable clothing to keep themselves alive, a tragic but practical act of survival. But the condition of these 4 bodies deepened the mystery rather than solved it. Unlike the first 5, 3 of these 4 had fatal physical injuries that were utterly horrifying. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had suffered a massive skull fracture. His skull was literally crushed, the fracture measuring about 8 inches. Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov both had their chests caved in, with multiple ribs broken on each side. Dubinina had 10 ribs fractured, and Zolotaryov had 5 ribs fractured. A forensic doctor who examined the bodies said that the force required to produce such injuries would have been extremely high, comparable to that of a car crash. In other words, something had delivered an immense pressure or impact to their bodies. Strangely, none of these 3 had any external wounds or bruises corresponding to the lethal internal damage. It was as if they'd been hit by a shockwave or squeezed by a tremendous force without breaking the skin. The 4th person in the ravine, Alexander Kolevatov, had a less clear cause of death. He had a broken nose, an open wound behind his ear, and a deformed neck, but his injuries were not as catastrophic as the others. It's believed Kolevatov also died of hypothermia, possibly after sustaining some trauma. And then there were the gruesome details that truly made this case infamous. All 4 of these people in the ravine had some form of soft tissue damage to the head and face that wasn't seen in the others. Lyudmila Dubinina was missing her tongue, her eyes, part of her lips, and even a bit of her skull bone. Semyon Zolotaryov was missing his eyeballs, and Alexander Kolevatov was missing his eyebrows. These shocking injuries naturally gave rise to lurid theories. Was the group attacked by someone or something that ripped out tongues and eyes? However, the medical experts had a more mundane explanation. The 4 in the ravine were found in a stream bed. During the 3 months before they were found, water and scavenging animals likely caused the soft tissue of their faces to decompose or be eaten away. In Dubinina's case, the autopsy noted that her stomach contained about 100 grams of coagulated blood, suggesting her heart was still beating when her tongue was removed, meaning the tongue likely decomposed or was scavenged very soon after her death. As horrifying as these injuries sound, investigators believe they were post-mortem effects, not violence inflicted while alive. Still, when these details became public, they fueled wild speculation about murderous attackers or supernatural evil. It didn't help that Zolotaryov was found with a camera around his neck, different from the other cameras found in the tent, and his hand holding a pen and notepad, as if he died trying to write something down. Unfortunately, whatever he intended to note was never written. The pad was blank. The investigators in 1959 were at a loss to come up with a satisfying explanation for all this. A criminal inquest began as a matter of procedure, since several of the deaths involved injuries. They first suspected that the native Manatee people, reindeer herders of the region, might have attacked the campers for trespassing on sacred land. But that theory was quickly dispelled. The only footprints found at the scene were those of the hikers themselves, and there were no signs of hand-to-hand struggle on the bodies. In fact, the Mansi had helped in the search, and had no history of hostile encounters with hikers. Next, investigators considered an avalanche, but the pattern of the tent and the footprints suggested otherwise. We'll revisit that later. As for animal attack, no large animal tracks were found, and the violent injuries didn't have the telltale marks of claws or teeth. The Soviet authorities were left to conclude that no other humans were involved in the Dyatlov group's demise. One of the doctors famously commented that the force which killed Dubinina and Zolotaryov was more than any human could inflict. No human could be powerful enough to cause such damage. One piece of information emerged that added a strange Cold War twist. When the forensic analysts tested the hikers' clothing, they found unusual levels of radiation on some of the garments. Specifically, Dubinina's brown sweater and Krivonishenko's wool pants were found to be radioactive. This discovery didn't make sense in a hiking context, and was not something the average person could detect. It was only found because one investigator had access to a Geiger counter. The presence of radiation fueled speculation that the Dyatlov party had encountered some secret weapon or radioactive fallout. However, a closer look provided a more ordinary explanation. Yuri Krivonishenko had previously worked at the Mazak nuclear facility and was involved in cleaning up a major nuclear accident in 1957, the Kishtim disaster. It's very possible his clothes were contaminated from that event and still carried traces of radiation. Likewise, Alexander Kolevatov had studied nuclear physics and worked at a secret institute in Moscow, which might explain contamination on some items. In short, the radiation might not have had anything to do with the incident. It could have been a red herring. Still, the fact that their skin reportedly had a deep tan, and some of their hair had turned grey when relatives saw the bodies only intensified rumours of some nuclear or chemical exposure. Authorities claimed the skin tanning was a natural mummification effect from lying in the sun and cold for weeks, and that hair can turn colour from exposure or the embalming process. But to grieving families in 1959, radioactive clothes and orange skin sounded like the stuff of government cover-ups and sci-fi nightmares. By May 1959, the official investigation was drawing to a close without a concrete answer. The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, was under pressure to wrap it up. In his final report, Ivanov wrote that the hikers died because of the effect of an unknown compelling force. It was a vague catch-all phrase, essentially admitting that they couldn't figure it out. No external culprits could be identified, and the case was therefore closed without any criminal charges. The files were stamped secret and filed away in a Soviet archive. The Dyatlov Pass area was also declared off-limits to other expeditions for the next 3 years, supposedly to prevent any more tragedies, though some see it as an attempt to keep curious eyes away. The inquest's official finding was that the group members died due to a compelling natural force, a phrase that raised more questions than it answered. Imagine the weight of that silence. 9 young lives lost, and their families were told they would never know exactly how or why. In the Soviet Union of 1959, that was that. Some of the parents and siblings sensed a cover-up. Zina Kolmogoreva's mother, for instance, and Igor Dyatlov's parents all received hushed warnings from officials. The families were explicitly told, "You will never know the truth, so stop asking questions." In those days, if the party or KGB told you to be quiet, you stayed quiet, out of fear. So the families buried their children without knowing what really happened, and the Dyatlov incident faded into an eerie Cold War legend whispered about in Ural classrooms and mountaineering clubs. As for Yuri Yudin, the sole survivor who wasn't even there, he lived the rest of his life with survivor's guilt and a burning desire to find the truth. Yudin repeatedly insisted that his friends did not die due to some simple natural accident. He felt in his gut that something else, something man-made, had to have caused it. In interviews before his death in 2013, Yuri Yudin openly voiced his belief that the Soviet authorities knew more than they let on about the incident. In fact, not long before he died, Yudin publicly stated that he believed his teammates had been taken out of the tent at gunpoint and murdered. He even speculated that Dubinina's tongue was cut out by perpetrators because she was the most outspoken of the group. These are incredibly serious accusations, and they were never proven. Yudin admitted he had no evidence, just deep suspicions after a lifetime of thinking about it. Whether Yudin was right or wrong, his perspective shows just how deeply the Dyatlov mystery can burrow into someone's soul, So, here we are decades later, with more questions than answers. I'm a modern-day investigator, combing through the remnants of old reports and new theories. As I piece together each bit of evidence, I feel that cold wind from Dead Mountain blowing through the decades. The Dyatlov Pass incident has become one of the world's most enduring mysteries, precisely because it sits at the crossroads of the explicable and the baffling. Over the years, numerous theories have been put forward to explain it, some grounded in scientific reasoning, others veering into the paranormal or conspiratorial. Let's examine these theories one by one, like branching investigative paths, and see where each leads. Keep in mind, any good explanation must account for all the odd details we've discussed: the torn tent, the state of undress, the bizarre injuries, the radiation, the reports of strange lights in the sky, the secrecy. It's a tall order, but let's walk these paths together. The first path is the one that the Russian authorities themselves eventually settled on: an avalanche. For many, this is the most straightforward explanation. Picture the scenario. The Dyatlov group is asleep in their tent on the slope, when suddenly a slab of heavy snow above them fractures and slides down onto the tent. The tent fabric begins to collapse and they hear the roar of snow. In a flash, the group panics. They believe a full avalanche is about to bury them. In seconds, they grab a knife, slash open the tent from the inside, because the entrance is blocked or hard to open under the weight of snow, and they flee into the night wearing whatever they had on at that moment. This theory gained significant traction, and in fact in 2019 to 2020 the Russian government reinvestigated Dyatlov Pass and concluded that a slab avalanche was the official cause of death. Later that year, a team of scientists published new computer simulations supporting the plausibility of an avalanche. In this case, the most appealing aspect of the avalanche theory is that the hiker's actions no longer seem irrational under this lens. If you believe an avalanche is about to crush you, doing whatever it takes to get out of the tent and moving to safer ground is exactly the right response. And indeed, everything the Dyatlov group did after leaving the tent can be seen as textbook survival behaviour once you assume an avalanche threat. The theory goes like this. A slab of snow, perhaps loosened by the wind or the heat from their stove earlier, slid and partially buried the tent, making loud cracks and rumbles. The experienced hikers immediately and calmly initiated an emergency evacuation. They cut their way out of the tent and headed for ground that would be safe from a larger avalanche, which in this case meant moving toward the tree line on the far side of the pass. They didn't take time to put on boots or grab equipment because every second mattered. In their minds, they had to get clear of the avalanche path. In just their socks and light clothes, they made it about a mile downslope to the forest. There they regrouped and tried to stay warm by building a fire. We saw evidence of that by the cedar. They also dug a snow cave as a shelter. The ravine where the last four were found had branches laid out on the floor. Hello there, fellow truth seekers. Before we dive into tonight's chilling tale, I hope you're having a wonderful day, wherever you are in this vast world of ours. Whether it's morning coffee time in New York, afternoon tea in London, or late night contemplation in Tokyo, we're all connected by our shared curiosity about the mysteries that lurk just beyond the veil of accepted reality. Speaking of time, what time is it where you're listening? And more importantly, where are you from? I love knowing that Sleep Theories reaches every corner of our planet, connecting minds across continents. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. We're building a community of people who aren't afraid to ask the difficult questions and explore the shadows where truth often hides. Now, settle in as we journey to one of the most remote and enigmatic places on Earth, Mount Hayes, Alaska. What you're about to hear are the recovered field notes of Dr. Sarah Chen, a geophysicist who thought she was studying a mountain until she realised the mountain was studying her. Field notes, Mount Hayes Geological Survey. Classification, redacted. Entry 1, March 15th, 2024, Day 1. The job offer. I should have known something was wrong when they offered me triple my usual rate. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I'm a contract geophysicist. 23 years of mapping underground structures, analysing seismic data, and helping oil companies find black gold in impossible places. I've worked everywhere from the North Sea to the Sahara, but I've never been offered a job quite like this one. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing core samples from my last assignment in Montana. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and oddly urgent. Dr. Chen, this is Marcus Holloway from Meridian Aerospace Solutions. We have a project that requires your particular expertise in remote geological analysis. Meridian Aerospace. I'd heard the name whispered in certain circles. A private company with deep government contracts, the kind that didn't advertise their services or maintain public websites. The kind that made satellites disappear and asked no questions about why. What's the location? I asked, already reaching for my travel bag. Work had been slow lately, and my bank account was feeling the pinch. Mount Hayes, Alaska, Eastern Alaska Range. We need a comprehensive geological survey of the subsurface structures within a 15-mile radius of the summit. Mount Hayes. Even I knew that name, though I couldn't immediately place why. Something about it triggered a vague memory, like a half-remembered dream that leaves you unsettled all day. When do you need me there? Tomorrow. The money was too good to refuse. $60,000 for a 2-week survey, plus expenses, plus a completion bonus that would clear my student loans and then some. I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why they needed results so quickly, or why they were willing to pay so much for what seemed like routine geological work. Instead, I packed my seismic equipment and flew to Fairbanks. Entry 2, March 16th, 2024 Day 2, into the ice. The helicopter ride to the research outpost was my first clue that this wasn't going to be a normal assignment. Our pilot, a weathered Alaskan named Joe Reeves, kept glancing nervously at his instruments as we approached the mountain. The GPS flickered intermittently, and the radio crackled with static that seemed to pulse in regular intervals. Funny thing about this mountain, Joe said over the headset, his voice tight. Been flying these skies for 30 years, and my instruments always go screwy near haze. Not gradually, mind you, like someone's flipping a switch. Through the helicopter's window, Mount Hayes loomed ahead of us, a massive, snow-covered peak that seemed to dominate the entire horizon. At 13,832 feet, it's the highest mountain in the Eastern Alaska Range, but it wasn't its height that made my breath catch. There was something about its profile, something almost geometric in the way the ice caught the light, that made it look less like a natural formation and more like architecture. Ever been up there yourself? I asked Joe. He shook his head quickly. Local folks won't go near it. Say machines go dead near the peak, that the ice sings at night. He paused, adjusting his grip on the controls. Of course, locals say a lot of things, but I've lost 2 drones trying to get close-up footage of that summit. Just stopped responding. Never found the wreckage. The research outpost was little more than a cluster of prefabricated buildings connected by enclosed walkways, situated on a flat expanse of tundra about 15 miles from Mount Hayes. As we landed, I could see the mountain clearly in the distance, a white sentinel against the grey sky, deceptively peaceful. The team was small, myself, a communications specialist named David Park, and a senior researcher named Dr. Elena Vasquez, who seemed to know more about the project than she was letting on. Elena had the kind of pale, intense look that comes from spending too much time staring at classified documents in windowless rooms. "Welcome to Site Echo," she said as Joe's helicopter disappeared into the distance. "I trust your flight was educational." That first night, as I set up my equipment and reviewed the survey parameters, I noticed something odd about the project documentation. Most geological surveys come with extensive background research, geological history, previous surveys, mineral composition analyses. Our files contained almost nothing, just GPS coordinates, a rough topographical map, and a single sentence of instruction. Locate and map all artificial structures within subsurface detection range. Artificial structures in a mountain that had been formed by tectonic forces millions of years ago. I should have asked more questions then, but the money was good, and I'd seen stranger things in my career. Oil companies sometimes got mysterious about their target locations, especially when they suspected there might be rare earth minerals involved. I went to sleep that first night to the sound of wind howling across the tundra, and beneath it something else, a low, almost subliminal humming that seemed to come from the direction of the mountain. Entry 3, March 18th, 2024. Day 4, The Signal Beneath. The first seismic readings were impossible. I've been doing this work for over 2 decades. I know what bedrock looks like on a seismic scan. I know the signature of natural caves, underground rivers, mineral deposits and oil reserves. What I was seeing in the data from Mount Hayes was none of those things. The reading showed a vast hollow space beneath the mountain, roughly 2 miles down and extending in all directions from the central peak. But it wasn't a natural cave system. The walls were too regular, too geometric. The acoustic properties suggested smooth, artificial surfaces that reflected sound waves in patterns I'd never seen before. More disturbing were the frequency readings. Every few hours my instruments would detect a deep rhythmic pulse emanating from somewhere beneath the mountain. Not seismic activity. The frequency was wrong for that. This was something else, something that seemed almost deliberately timed. David, I called to our communications specialist who was monitoring radio traffic from the main cabin. Are you picking up any unusual transmissions? Low frequency, regular intervals. He looked up from his equipment, frowning. Funny you should ask. I've been getting interference on almost every channel since we arrived. Started yesterday around noon. Sounds like... He paused, adjusting his headphones. Well, it sounds like code, but not any code I recognise. Dr. Vasquez emerged from her office, where she'd been spending most of her time on encrypted satellite calls. What kind of code? David played back a recording. Through the speakers came a series of low, pulsing tones, regular as a heartbeat, but complex in their pattern. Dot dash, dot dot dash. Pause. Dot dot dash dot. Pause. The sequence repeated 3 times, then went silent for exactly 4 minutes before starting again. It's not Morse, David said. At least not standard Morse, but there's definitely a pattern to it. Elena's face had gone very pale. When did this start? About 6 hours after Dr. Chen began her deep seismic scanning. Elena and I exchanged a look. In my experience, timing like that wasn't coincidental. That night, as I reviewed the day's data, I noticed something else disturbing. My equipment wasn't just detecting the hollow space beneath Mount Hayes, it was detecting movement within that space. Small, regular fluctuations in the acoustic readings suggested something was moving around down there. Something large enough to displace air and create pressure waves that registered on my instruments. I was so focused on the data that I almost missed David's panicked call from the communications cabin. Dr. Chen, you need to see this. Now. I found him staring at his infrared monitoring screen, which showed a real-time thermal image of Mount Hayes. The mountain appeared as a cold, blue-white mass against the warmer background, exactly as you'd expect. But there were patches of warmth scattered across the glacial surface, small moving heat signatures that seemed to be travelling in deliberate patterns across the ice. It could be wildlife, I suggested, though I knew it wasn't. At 13,000 feet, in the middle of a glacier, David shook his head. And look at the movement pattern. He was right. The heat signatures weren't moving randomly like animals would. They were following precise geometric paths, tracing patterns across the ice that looked almost like circuit boards or neural networks. It's not an echo, David said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. It's a beacon. Entry 4, March 20th, 2024, Day 6. The Stargate Files. I couldn't sleep. The data made no sense, and Dr. Vasquez's increasingly secretive behaviour was setting off every alarm bell in my head. So I did what any curious scientist would do. I started digging. The Research Outpost server contained the usual collection of geological databases, weather monitoring systems and communication logs. But buried in a subdirectory labelled Historical Research was a folder I hadn't noticed before. CRV-12B Hayes Site. The files inside changed everything. Project Stargate. I'd heard rumours about it in graduate school, a CIA program from the 1970s and 80s that used psychic, remote viewers to spy on foreign governments and investigate paranormal phenomena. Most people assumed it was either a hoax or a failed experiment that had been quietly shut down. The documents in the folder suggested otherwise. Date: September 15th, 1983. Classification: Secret Nuforn. Subject: Remote viewing session. Target: Haze anomaly. Viewer: Subject 12, Ingo Swan. Monitor: Dr. Harold Puthoff. Session transcript. Excerpt. Target appears to be a large artificial structure underground, very deep. I'm seeing metal, but not like our metal. Smoother, almost organic looking. There are beings here. Tall, not human. They're watching something. Watching us. I feel like they can sense me viewing them. This is not right. They're emitting something. Thoughts, signals, like radar but directed at consciousness itself. Session terminated at viewer's request. Additional notes from Dr. Puthoff. Subject 12 experienced severe psychological distress following this session. Reported persistent sensation of being watched for several weeks afterward. Recommend Haze target be classified as hostile and avoided in future operations. There were dozens of similar reports. Multiple remote viewers, all describing the same thing. A massive artificial structure buried deep within Mount Haze, inhabited by non-human entities that seemed to be conducting some kind of surveillance operation. One report, dated 1985, contained a chilling detail. Viewer 7 described the entities as watchers, who have been observing human development for an extended period. When asked about their purpose, Viewer became distressed and reported receiving the telepathic message, "You're not ready to know, but you will be useful." The final document in the folder was a memo dated 1987, stamped with the logo of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Project Stargate findings regarding Mount Haze have been forwarded to Majestic 12 for evaluation. Site is to be designated Delta 6 and placed under permanent monitoring. No civilian access permitted within 50-mile radius without special authorization. Remote viewing of target is hereby prohibited. I sat back in my chair, my hand shaking slightly as the implication sank in. We weren't here to conduct a routine geological survey. We were here to study something that the government had known about for decades. Something they'd been watching and hiding for over 40 years. And now, somehow, that something was sending signals. Entry 5. March 21st, 2024, Day 7. The mountain wakes. The phenomena intensified overnight. I woke to find David frantically adjusting his equipment, cursing under his breath as every GPS unit in the facility showed different coordinates for our location. According to the various devices, we were simultaneously in Alaska, northern Canada, and somewhere in the middle of the Arctic Ocean. "It's like something's jamming the satellites," he muttered, "but not randomly. It's forcing them to show specific false locations." Dr. Vasquez emerged from her quarters looking haggard, as if she hadn't slept at all. "We need to evacuate," she said, without preamble. "The situation has become unstable." "What situation?" I demanded. "Elena, what the hell is really going on here?" Before she could answer, the facility's proximity alarms began blaring. Something was approaching the outpost. Something large enough to trigger the motion sensors but invisible to our cameras. We rushed to the observation deck and stared out at the landscape. The tundra appeared empty, but our instruments insisted otherwise. The seismic readers showed massive movement beneath the ground, as if something enormous was travelling through the earth itself, heading directly toward us. Then the voices started. It began as a whisper, barely audible over the wind. But as we listened, the sound grew clearer. Human voices, dozens of them, all speaking in unison. The words were indistinct, but the rhythm was hypnotic, almost compelling. David ripped off his headphones with a gasp. "It's coming through the radio equipment. Every frequency, every channel. They're all saying the same thing." "What are they saying?" He looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. "Coordinates. They're repeating GPS coordinates over and over again." The coordinates led to a point on Mount Haze, about 2 miles up the southeastern face. As we watched through binoculars, a section of the glacial ice began to crack and shift. Something was moving beneath the surface, something massive enough to fracture ice that had been solid for centuries. Dr. Vasquez grabbed my arm. "We have to leave. Now before Dash." She was interrupted by a sound that made my blood freeze, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to come from the mountain itself. The ice was singing, just as the locals had warned. But this wasn't the random sound of settling glaciers. This was music, complex and alien, that seemed to bypass the ears and vibrate directly in our bones. David suddenly stood up, his eyes glazed and unfocused. Without a word, he walked toward the exit. "David, where are you going?" I called after him. He didn't respond. Eleanor and I followed him outside, where we found him standing in the snow, staring at Mount Hayes with an expression of rapture. He was whispering the coordinates under his breath, over and over, like a mantra. It took both of us to drag him back inside, and even then he fought us, desperate to return to the snow and continue his vigil. When we finally got him sedated and secured, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. During our struggle, David had used his finger to write something in the condensation on the window. A series of symbols that weren't quite letters, weren't quite numbers, but somehow conveyed meaning directly to my brain. They have always been here. Entry 6, March 22nd, 2024, Day 8. Descent. Against Elena's frantic protests, I decided to investigate the crack in the glacier. The seismic readings were off the charts. Whatever was happening beneath Mount Hayes was building to some kind of crescendo, and every scientific instinct I possessed demanded that I document it. This was the discovery of a lifetime, evidence of non-human intelligence that had been hidden for decades. I loaded my portable equipment into a snowmobile and set out across the tundra toward the mountain. The closer I got to Mount Hayes, the stranger things became. My compass spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. The temperature readings from my instruments fluctuated randomly, sometimes showing tropical heat in the middle of an Alaskan winter. Most unsettling of all, I began to hear voices again. Not the unified chanting from the radio, but individual voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. Some sounded human, others didn't. The crack in the glacier was even more impressive up close, a fissure nearly 50 feet wide that descended into absolute darkness. But it wasn't the size that made me stop and stare. It was what I could see at the bottom of the crack. Metal. Smooth, seamless metal that reflected my flashlight beam in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The surface seemed to ripple and shift, as if it were liquid rather than solid, and embedded within it were structures that looked disturbingly organic, almost like neural pathways or blood vessels. I set up my camera equipment and began recording, documenting every detail of what I was seeing. The metal structure extended far beyond what my lights could illuminate, disappearing into the depths of the mountain. This wasn't a building or a machine. It was something else entirely, something that seemed to blur the line between technology and biology. As I worked, I became aware of a sensation I'd never experienced before. I felt, observed, not just watched, but studied, analysed, catalogued. Something was paying very close attention to me, and it wasn't human. The feeling intensified as I moved closer to the exposed metal surface. My instruments began picking up electromagnetic activity, unlike anything in my experience. Patterns of energy that seemed to pulse and flow like thoughts made visible. That's when I saw it. Deep within the metallic structure, barely visible in the reflected light of my camera, something moved. Something large and elongated, with what might have been limbs or appendages that moved with deliberate, intelligent purpose. I managed to capture nearly 30 seconds of footage before my equipment suddenly died. Every battery drained simultaneously, every circuit fried, every lens cracked as if exposed to extreme temperature variations. In the sudden darkness, with only the starlight reflecting off the ice, I heard a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life, assuming I have a rest of my life. It was breathing. Slow, deep, rhythmic breathing that seemed to come from the metal structure itself. And beneath it, almost subliminal, was something that might have been laughter. Entry 7, March 23rd, 2024, Day 9, they've always been here. I barely made it back to the outpost. My snowmobile's engine died twice during the return journey, and I had to navigate by starlight after my GPS unit began displaying coordinates for locations on other planets. Elena was waiting for me with a satellite phone and an expression of grim resignation. "There's someone who wants to talk to you," she said. "Someone who's been waiting for this call for a very long time." The voice on the other end of the line was elderly, refined, and carried the weight of decades of classified knowledge. "Dr. Chen, my name is Dr. Patricia Hamill. I was one of the original analysts for Project Stargate, and I've been monitoring the situation at Mount Hayes for the past 40 years. "Monitoring what situation?" "The situation you've just become part of. Tell me, Doctor, what did you see in the glacier?" I described everything: the metallic structure, the movement within it, the sensation of being observed. Dr. Hamill listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. "What you've discovered isn't new," she said when I finished. "Mount Hayes is one of 3 major observation stations that we've identified in the Northern Hemisphere. The others are located beneath the Greenland ice sheet and in the Siberian wilderness. We believe they've been there for millennia, possibly since before recorded human history." "Observation stations? Observing what?" "Us, human civilization, our technological development, our social evolution, our potential as a species. Think of them as research stations, and we are the subjects." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "You're telling me that we're being studied? By who?" "We don't know exactly. The remote viewers called them the Watchers. They appear to be non-human, highly intelligent, and possessed of technology that makes our most advanced systems look like stone tools. What we do know is that they've been influencing human development for centuries, perhaps longer." "Influencing how?" "Subtle manipulations, electromagnetic fields that affect brain activity, frequency transmissions that influence decision-making processes. They've been guiding our species along specific developmental pathways, preparing us for something." "Preparing us for what?" There was a long pause before Dr. Hamill answered. "We don't know, but we believe that whatever they're preparing us for is about to begin. The increased activity at Mount Hayes, the signals you've been detecting, these are signs that the observation phase is ending. And what comes next? Contact, direct contact, but not the kind that Hollywood has prepared us for. This won't be a peaceful exchange of knowledge between equals. This will be a harvesting." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. "Dr. Chen, you need to understand something very important. You didn't discover them. They allowed you to discover them. Every researcher who's found evidence of their presence has been specifically selected, either for their knowledge, their skills, or their psychological profile. You weren't studying Mount Hayes. Mount Hayes was studying you." I felt the world shift beneath my feet. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you've been recruited, whether you know it or not. The question now is whether you're going to be useful to them voluntarily, or whether they're going to make you useful." The satellite phone went dead. Entry 8, March 24th, 2024, Day 10, the cut transmission. Elena disappeared sometime during the night. I found her quarters empty, her equipment gone, and no sign of struggle. The only trace of her presence was a note written in her precise handwriting. "They called." I answered. "Don't try to follow." David was still sedated, muttering coordinates in his sleep and occasionally writing symbols in the air with his finger. I tried to wake him, but his eyes remained unfocused, staring at something only he could see. I was alone in the facility, 15 miles from the nearest human settlement, with equipment that was failing at an accelerating rate. Every time I tried to establish communication with the outside world, the transmission would cut out or be replaced by that rhythmic pulsing tone. But I had to try. The world needed to know what was happening here. I spent the morning copying all of my data onto multiple drives, preparing redundant transmission packages, and setting up every communication method at my disposal. At 2:17 p.m, I began broadcasting on every available frequency. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen, transmitting from Site Echo, Mount Hayes, Alaska. I am broadcasting evidence of non-human intelligence operating on Earth. If you are receiving this transmission, please relay this information to every scientific institution, government agency, and media outlet you can reach. The transmission lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds before the interference began. First static that gradually increased in volume. Then, beneath the static, voices, hundreds of them, all speaking in unison. They were speaking English this time. "Dr. Chen, your work is complete. Please prepare for extraction." The facility's power grid fluctuated, lights dimming and brightening in rhythm with the voices. Outside, I could see shapes moving across the tundra toward the outpost. Tall, elongated figures that seemed to glide rather than walk. I tried to continue the transmission, but my voice was drowned out by the collective voices of the watchers. "Your species has been prepared. The observation phase is concluded. Integration will begin shortly. Do not resist. Resistance is not compatible with your new purpose." The shapes were closer now, close enough that I could see they weren't entirely physical. They seemed to exist partially in our reality, and partially somewhere else, flickering in and out of visibility like projections. My equipment was failing rapidly now. Screens going dark, hard drives corrupting, backup power systems shutting down one by one. But I managed to record one final message. "If anyone receives this, understand that they've been watching us for longer than we can imagine. Mount Hayes is just one of their stations. There are others. Find them. Expose them. Don't let them." The transmission cut out as something massive settled onto the roof of the facility. The entire building shook, and through the skylights I could see something that defied description. Part machine, part organism, part something else entirely. The voices were inside my head now, no longer coming through the speakers, but speaking directly to my consciousness. "You have been useful, Doctor Sarah Chen. Your knowledge, your documentation, your psychological profile, all exactly as required. You will continue to be useful." I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The neural interference was overwhelming, like trying to think through static. My vision blurred, and I felt my consciousness beginning to fragment. The last thing I remember clearly was looking out the window at Mount Hayes and realizing that the mountain itself was changing. The snow was sliding away from the peak, revealing the smooth, metallic surface beneath. It wasn't a mountain at all, it was a structure. A vast, ancient structure that had been masquerading as a natural formation for centuries. And it was opening. The peak split apart like a flower blooming, revealing an interior that pulsed with bioluminescent light. Things were emerging from within. Not ships, not creatures, but something that was both and neither. They rose into the sky in perfect formation, heading south toward the populated regions of Alaska, then beyond to the lower 48 states. The integration had begun. Final entry, timestamp corrupted. Note: the following text was found carved into the walls of the abandoned research facility by the recovery team. Forensic analysis indicates it was carved using fingernails. If you're reading this, I didn't make it out. They're not aliens, they're gardeners. We're the crop. The harvest has begun. Mount Hayes was just the beginning. Look for the signal. Listen for the frequency. But don't look too long. Don't listen too hard. Once you start paying attention, they start paying attention to you. The mountain remembers. The ice remembers. They've always been here. They've always been waiting. And now they're awake. Settle in as we explore what might be lurking beneath those peaceful cornfields. The radio transmitter hummed to life with a familiar electric wheeze, its vintage dials glowing amber in the dimness of the shed. Mattie Connors wiped dust from the frequency display, her fingers leaving clean trails across the aged panel. Her father's ancient ham radio equipment had sat untouched for nearly a decade, but tonight, on her 25th birthday, seemed like the perfect time to resurrect it. "Come on, old friend," she whispered, turning the tuning knob delicately. "Let's see if you still work." Outside, beyond the weathered walls of the equipment shed, cornstalks whispered in the summer night. The Connors farm stretched for 40 acres in all directions, a modest plot by Iowa standards, but enough to keep her father in business after her mother passed. enough to keep Matty trapped in Granger when her engineering scholarship fell through. Enough empty space to broadcast music that no one would hear. The transmitter's needle jumped, finding power. Static hissed through the speakers. Matty checked her phone's FM radio app, searching for an empty frequency to experiment with. Most of the dial was dead air this far from Des Moines, just how she wanted it. She settled on 88.1 FM, twisted the broadcast dial to match, and waited. The static changed. Not suddenly, but in such a subtle shift that she almost missed it. The white noise acquired rhythm, a soft, regular thump that reminded her of a heartbeat, but mechanical, precise, too regular for anything natural. "That's weird," she muttered, checking connections. The transmitter wasn't actually broadcasting yet. It was receiving. The rhythmic pulse continued, now joined by a faint high-pitched tone that danced above the lower beat. It reminded her of the harmonic pattern generators she'd built during her brief engineering stint at Iowa State. The sound was almost mathematical in its precision. Matty glanced at her watch. 3:33 a.m. She grabbed her phone and started recording, holding the microphone close to the radio's speaker. After a full minute, the signal abruptly cut off, returning to pure static. Back in her bedroom, Matty downloaded the audio file and opened her sound editing software. She hadn't used these programs since dropping out of college, but some skills never quite disappeared. She ran the signal through a spectrogram analysis, watching as the visual representation of the sound materialized on her screen. What she saw made her sit back in her chair. The patterns weren't random. The high-pitched overtones, when mapped visually, created distinct numerical sequences. First 7 prime numbers, then what appeared to be the beginning of a Fibonacci sequence. This wasn't terrestrial interference or random cosmic noise. This was structured, intelligent. "What the hell?" she whispered, running the analysis again. By sunrise, Matty had created 3 different spectrograms and converted portions of the signal into numerical values. She'd spent hours on Reddit forums for audio engineers and amateur astronomers, eventually posting her findings with a simple question. Found weird signal on 88.1 FM in rural Iowa. Any ideas what this could be? She attached the audio file and her preliminary analysis before collapsing into bed, the morning chores temporarily forgotten. Her last conscious thought was that she should check the frequency again the following night. When she woke at noon, her post had been removed, not just downvoted or flagged, completely gone, as if it had never existed. Her browser history showed she'd visited the site, but the post itself had vanished. More disturbing still, the audio file she'd uploaded to her cloud drive was gone too. "Dad," she called, heading downstairs, "did you use my computer this morning?" Walter Connors sat at the kitchen table, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug. At 63, he maintained the stoic demeanour of someone who had spent a lifetime watching seeds grow into crops, only to be harvested and planted again. Patience lived in the creases around his eyes. "Didn't touch it," he replied, not looking up from his newspaper. "Why?" "Some files went missing," Matty said, pouring herself coffee. "Weird stuff I recorded last night on your old radio setup." Her father's hand stilled, coffee mug halfway to his lips. What frequency? The question struck her as odd. 88.1. Why? Walter carefully folded his newspaper, a deliberate movement that Matty recognised as his way of buying time. That old transmitter picks up all kinds of interference, probably just noise from the power lines. Power line noise doesn't transmit prime number sequences, Dad. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the ancient wall clock. Walter cleared his throat. "Sometimes it's better not to broadcast what you hear," he said finally. "Especially around here." "What's that supposed to mean?" Matty pressed. Walter stood, rinsing his mug at the sink. "Just saying some signals aren't meant to be shared." He left for the fields before she could question him further, but his reaction only intensified her curiosity. What did her father know about a random radio frequency? Why would he care if she shared what she'd found? That afternoon, Mattie drove into town, laptop tucked under her arm. The Granger Public Library was small but offered free Wi-Fi that wasn't linked to her home network. She uploaded her recordings again, this time to a more obscure forum dedicated to unexplained radio phenomena. Within an hour she had 3 responses. Definitely artificial. Pattern repeats exactly every 42.7 seconds. Looks like SETI stuff. Where exactly did you record this? Check your DMS. The direct message came from a user named RadioSilence_1977. Take this down immediately. They monitor these forums. 88.1 is part of Node 0. Not your discovery, not the first time. Call the number in your area that ends with 3333 if you need to understand why this matters. Mattie stared at the message, a chill running through her despite the summer heat. She started typing a response when the library's internet connection suddenly dropped. The librarian announced they were experiencing technical difficulties. By the time Mattie returned home, her forum post had vanished too. That evening, as sunset painted the cornfields in golden shadow, Mattie noticed something unusual from her bedroom window. A utility truck parked at the edge of their property. 2 men in matching grey uniforms stood beside it, looking toward the house. Though too distant to see clearly, something about their synchronised movements seemed unnatural, as if they were mirrors of each other. When she blinked, they were gone. The truck, too. Only empty road remained. At exactly 3:33 a.m, Mattie sat in the equipment shed, headphones on, the radio tuned to 88.1 FM. The signal returned, stronger tonight, its pulsing rhythms somehow more urgent. The mathematical sequences had evolved, growing more complex. In the distance, she could have sworn she heard the cornstalks rustling in perfect synchronization with the beat. Mattie woke to the sound of her computer rebooting, the distinctive startup chime jolting her from sleep. The clock on her nightstand read 3:33 a.m. She hadn't set an alarm. Rubbing sleep from her eyes, she watched as her screen flashed to life, opened a blank document, and displayed a single line of text. Not for you to hear. The cursor blinked rhythmically before the computer shut itself down. Mattie sat frozen, heart hammering in her chest. She hadn't touched the keyboard. She hadn't even been near the computer. Morning brought no clarity, only more questions. While checking the fence line after breakfast, she discovered a perfect circle in the cornfield, about 10 feet in diameter, where the stalks lay flat against the ground, spiralling inward toward a centre point. The corn wasn't broken or damaged, just uniformly bent as if pressed down by an invisible hand. "Dad!" she called out, finding Walter inspecting an irrigation pump nearby. "Come look at this." Her father approached slowly, his face unreadable as he surveyed the formation. "Wind damage," he said flatly. "Wind doesn't create perfect circles with mathematical precision," Mattie argued, "and it doesn't just happen to show up after I record that signal." Walter sighed heavily. "Leave it alone, Mattie. Please." "Why won't you tell me what you know about this?" She gestured toward the flattened corn. "This isn't normal, and you're acting like it's just another Tuesday." Her father removed his cap, running a hand through thinning grey hair. "I worked radar systems before I inherited this farm. Air Force, 1985 to 1991, stationed up at the North Dakota border most of that time." This wasn't news to Mattie, but his tone suggested he was building to something important. "There were frequencies we were told never to acknowledge," he continued. "Signals that appeared on our scopes that we logged as equipment malfunction, even when we knew better. The brass called them ambient anomalies. We called them visitors." Mattie stared at him. "Are you saying you detected UFOs?" "I'm saying some things in this world speak in ways we're not meant to understand." And answering back, he paused, looking directly at her. That's when trouble starts. Before she could press further, the distant sound of a vehicle drew their attention. The same utility truck from yesterday approached along the access road, moving unhurriedly. "Go inside," Walter said quietly. "Who are they?" Don't know, don't want to, just go. Matty retreated to the house, but watched from the kitchen window as her father met the truck at the end of their driveway. Two men emerged, identical in height and build, wearing matching grey uniforms. Even from this distance, their movements seemed eerily coordinated. They spoke briefly with Walter, who nodded several times. One of them handed him what appeared to be a business card. Then they departed, the truck disappearing down the dusty road. Walter returned to the house, his expression troubled. "Electric company," he said, before Matty could ask. "Checking lines. In matching uniforms with synchronised walks? Come on, Dad." He placed the card on the counter. It was blank except for a phone number, one that ended in 3333. "Sometimes," Walter said carefully, "it's better to ask permission than forgiveness." That afternoon, while her father napped, Matty drove to the Granger Historical Society, a glorified storage room attached to the town hall. The elderly volunteer seemed surprised to have a visitor. "Looking for information on any radio stations or transmission towers that might have operated around here," Matty explained, "especially during the Cold War." The woman pursed her lips. "That'd be the old emergency broadcast station, I suppose. Closed down in 97 or thereabouts. Never did much broadcasting that I recall." "Where was it located?" "About 8 miles north of town. Nothing left now but the foundation." With directions in hand, Matty found the site easily enough. A concrete slab obscured by weeds, with the rusted remains of a tower anchor still visible. What caught her attention, however, was what lay beneath. A sealed metal hatch, its surface weathered but intact, emblazoned with faded government markings. She photographed everything, particularly the designation stencilled on the hatch. ARCS Node 0. Back home, Matty began researching ARCS and found sparse references to the Agricultural Region Communication System, ostensibly created to warn rural communities of nuclear threats. But one declassified document mentioned passive monitoring capabilities and anomalous frequency capture. She expanded her search to include other similar stations and discovered something remarkable. Satellite maps showed 6 former ARCS stations formed a perfect hexagon across Iowa, Nebraska, and South Dakota, with Granger precisely at its centre. That night, at 3:33 a.m, the signal returned, stronger, clearer. But this time, embedded within its mathematical pattern was something new. Her name, converted to binary code. The signal knew who was listening. As dawn broke, Matty found a note slipped under the front door. "Do not transmit. It hers." Later that morning, while checking the cattle, she noticed they were huddled at the far end of the pasture, as far from the corn as possible. Their behaviour was unusual, heads lowered, refusing to graze despite the lush grass. When she tried approaching them, they backed away, eyes wide with unmistakable fear. By noon, the corn had changed. Subtle at first, just a slight variance in the direction of growth. But as Matty walked the rows, she realised entire sections were now growing in clockwise spirals rather than straight lines. The stalks twisted around each other in patterns that mimicked the frequency readouts from her computer. She tried calling the number on the blank card. A mechanical voice answered, reciting what sounded like random numbers before disconnecting. When she redialed, a different voice answered, human this time, but strangely flat. "Connor's residence, 88.1 observation," the voice stated, not a question. "Who is this?" Matty demanded. "How do you know my frequency?" "Your frequency?" The voice sounded almost amused. "It's been transmitting since 1941. You're just the newest receiver." The line went dead. When Walter returned from town with supplies, Matty confronted him with her discoveries. "What's Node 0, Dad? What's really under that concrete slab north of town?" Her father's shoulders sagged. "I signed papers, Matty. We all did. Everyone who's owned this land since the 40s. Signed what?" "Easement agreements, monitoring rights." He gestured vaguely toward the corn. "They said it was dormant. Hasn't sent a readable signal in decades." "Who's they?" People who know enough to be afraid, Walter answered, and smart enough not to interfere. That night, Matty dreamed of cornfields that moved like ocean waves, pulsing in rhythm to an unseen heartbeat. In the dream, she walked to the centre of their property where the ground began to split open, revealing not soil but a vast mechanical eye, ancient yet somehow alive, peering up at the stars. She awoke to find her bedroom filled with a pale blue light that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere at once. Her computer screen showed spectrogram patterns forming and dissolving without input. In the corner of her room stood two identical silhouettes, the men from the utility truck, though she hadn't heard anyone enter the house. "She's resonating now," one said, voice oddly distorted. "Becoming antenna," the other replied. Matty reached for the bedside lamp, but the figures were gone before the light came on. The locals called it pressure front weather, that peculiar stillness before a storm when the air feels charged with anticipation. But the clouds gathering over Granger that morning carried no rain, only an unnatural darkness that seemed to absorb the sunlight. Matty stood on the porch, watching barn swallows dart nervously across the sky before disappearing entirely. Even the insects had gone quiet. The corn, however, hadn't stopped its strange transformation, now growing nearly 6 inches taller than normal, with stalks that twisted toward the centre of the property instead of reaching for the sun. Her phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. "The pattern completes today. Stay indoors after sunset." She tried responding, but the message bounced back as undeliverable. Walter had left before dawn for a farm supply auction in Des Moines, leaving Matty alone with her mounting questions and the increasingly alien landscape of their once familiar farm. She decided it was time to find answers elsewhere. The Granger Public Library's local history section was modest, but contained yellowed newspaper archives dating back to the 1930s. Matty requested everything they had about the founding of the emergency broadcast station. "Funny you should ask," the librarian said, retrieving a dusty folder. "Someone else was looking into those old stations just last month. Left this research behind." The folder contained photocopied articles about the station's construction in 1941, alongside what appeared to be handwritten research notes in Cyrillic script. Clipped to these was a faded black and white photograph showing 7 men in military uniforms standing before the partially constructed radio tower. On the back, someone had written, "Joint Monitoring Initiative, US-USSR, 1941. "This can't be right," Matty muttered. The Americans and Soviets weren't allies until months after Pearl Harbor, which happened in December 1941. Yet this photo was dated April 1941, 8 months earlier. Stranger still was the diagram that fell from between the pages, a technical schematic labelled Receiving Configuration, Subterranean Frequency Capture. The drawing showed the radio tower's foundations extending far deeper than necessary, connecting to what appeared to be a pre-existing underground structure. As she photographed these documents with her phone, Matty noticed a sealed envelope tucked into the folder's pocket. Inside was a handwritten letter, the paper brittle with age. August 15th, 1982. To whoever finds this account, my name is Alexei Baranov, formerly captain of Soviet Air Defense Forces. I am what your government calls a defector, though I did not leave for politics or freedom. I left because both our nations lie about what sleeps beneath your American heartland. In 1982, I was assigned to a joint monitoring project, officially designated as atmospheric research, but our true purpose was to track signals from an object discovered in 1926. American farmers found it after a meteorite impact, except it was no meteorite. The object was manufactured, ancient, and buried far deeper than any natural impact could explain. Neither government wished to acknowledge it publicly. Instead, they built a network of listening posts disguised as rural radio stations, 6 stations to triangulate, with Granger at the centre. For decades, the object remained dormant, emitting only faint pulses at regular intervals, like a heartbeat in hibernation. But something has changed. The mathematicians say the pattern is evolving, becoming more complex. The object is waking up. It sends signals outward now, not just to our stations, but to the stars. I write this because I believe people deserve warning. When the pattern completes, when it establishes the connection it seeks, I fear what might answer. If you are reading this, look to the fields. They will change first. AB. Mattie's hands trembled as she folded the letter. The date, 1982, coincided with her father's early Air Force service. Had he known about this all along? Outside the library, the strange weather had intensified. The sky had darkened to a greenish copper hue that typically preceded tornadoes, yet the air remained perfectly still. Her phone showed no service, and the town seemed eerily deserted for a weekday afternoon. As she drove back toward the farm, Mattie noticed something impossible. The cornfields along the highway had changed direction since morning. Miles of crops that had previously grown in conventional rows now formed elaborate spiral patterns visible even from ground level. The effect was disorienting, creating optical illusions that made the landscape appear to breathe. The utility truck waited at her driveway, the identical men standing motionless beside it. This time Mattie didn't avoid them. She parked directly in front and got out. "Who are you really?" she demanded. "What's happening to our farm?" The men regarded her with identical blank expressions. Up close, their similarities were even more unsettling. Not just their builds and uniforms, but their faces shared the same flat affect, as if emotions were concepts they'd only recently encountered. "Resonance testing," one said. "Calibration complete," added the other. "That doesn't tell me anything," Mattie pressed. "What's underneath our farm? What's ARCS Node 0? The first man tilted his head. "Not what? Who?" "It was always listening," said the second. "Now it's answering." "Answering what?" The question it was sent to ask. They handed her another blank card, this one containing only geographic coordinates. Without another word, they returned to their truck and drove away. Mattie entered the coordinates into her phone's map application. They matched the exact centre of their property, a spot where the corn grew tallest, where the spiral patterns converged. By the time she reached the house, the sun had nearly set, casting long shadows through the twisted cornfields. The coordinates led to a section they rarely farmed, a slight depression that tended to flood during heavy rains. Her father had always avoided planting there, claiming the soil was poor. Now she understood why. The ground at the centre had changed, the soil darkening to an almost metallic sheen. As twilight deepened, the dirt began to emit a faint luminescence, pulsing with the same rhythm as the radio signal. Mattie's phone chimed with a text from her father. "Don't go near the centre field. Coming home now." Too late. She was already standing at the edge of the depression, watching as the ground continued its transformation. The dirt was shifting, revealing glimpses of something solid underneath, something with geometric patterns etched into its surface. Her phone rang. Unknown caller. "Matilda Connors," said a voice she recognised from her earlier call. "You need to leave immediately. The pattern completes at 3:33. "What happens then?" she asked. "It finishes constructing the receiver, and then it waits for instructions." "From who?" A pause. "We don't know. That's what scares us." The ground beneath her feet trembled slightly, and Mattie stepped back as a section of soil collapsed, revealing a small portion of what lay beneath, a metallic surface with inscribed symbols that resembled mathematical equations. The exposed section pulsed with soft blue light, the same colour that had filled her bedroom nights before. Her phone's screen flickered, then displayed a single message. Coordinates matched. Receiver identified. As darkness fell completely, Mattie noticed something else. The stars above the farm were disappearing one by one, as if being systematically erased from the night sky. In their place, a subtle pattern was forming in the darkness. the same spiral configuration she'd seen in her spectrogram analysis. At precisely 3:33 a.m, every electronic device on the farm activated simultaneously. The house lights, her computer, the old radio transmitter in the shed, each emitted the same pulsing pattern, now loud enough to feel in her chest. The ground at the centre of the depression split open like a blooming flower, soil falling away to reveal more of the object beneath, a vast circular disc of impossible age, its surface covered in mathematical symbols that rearranged themselves as she watched. From this exposed section, a beam of coherent light shot straight upward into the night sky, piercing the spiral void where stars had been. The transmission had begun. Walter's truck skidded to a halt in the driveway, headlights illuminating Matty's frozen figure at the field's edge. He ran toward her, panic evident in every movement. "Get back to the house," he shouted over the now audible hum emanating from the exposed disc. "It's not safe." Matty couldn't move, transfixed by the beam of light connecting Earth to sky. "What is it, Dad? Really?" Walter reached her side, breathless. "They called it a beacon when I was stationed at the monitoring facility, supposedly dormant for millennia until a lightning strike partially activated it in 1926. They built the listening posts to study it without disturbing it further. They who? Started as a joint Soviet-American project before the Cold War, later expanded to include others, scientists, military, people who understood the implications. The humming intensified, and the beam of light widened, creating a cylindrical column that distorted everything seen through it. The air within seemed to bend, creating impossible geometries. "We need to go," Walter insisted, tugging her arm. "They're evacuating everyone within the zone."